The two armies confronted each other on a field that was already engulfed in flames. The army of people fought with enthusiasm for their god Nebula, and the army of orcs entered the battle for the sake of their god, Hegemony. The two armies finally faced each other and pointed their spears and swords at each other. One of the players pressed the keys on the keyboard very quickly in order to deliver a new blow. One of the orcs struck the ground with his huge hammer, creating a small shockwave that was enough to knock over nearby people and scare the horses. The infantrymen lined up and began to fire their weapons at the monsters. Artillery was also used and fired its shells at the enemies. But the orcs cast spells against them that helped them defend themselves. One of the players seemed to ask a rhetorical question whether this was all hegemony. After some time, planes also entered the battle. One of the players was very happy with the command he gave to the game. Suddenly, lightning struck the people, which immediately took them out of the battle. It was as if the two players were sitting at a chessboard and sacrificing their pieces for the sake of victory. One of the players, watching the progress of the battle, decided to act differently. He wishes to launch an attack with nuclear warheads in the name of the god Nebula. On command, one of the warheads rises from somewhere. Seeing several warheads in the sky, the orcs pointed at them, and some became very alarmed. The second player was not surprised and just grinned at the nuclear attack. Holding a special object in his hand, he communicates that he was prepared for such a move by his opponent. Others flew out to meet the nuclear shells to prevent a collision. The defensive shells, which were enveloped in lightning, were rapidly approaching the nuclear ones. The first player notices the interceptor missiles and notes that the enemy is prepared, but does not seem surprised. The nuclear shells and interceptor missiles collided and created a huge explosion in the sky. But almost immediately after this, another unknown projectile flies out. He is capable of flying so far that he is already in space. The first player calmly watches as the projectile disintegrates in space. Leaving the unnecessary part in space, the projectile flies back to the ground, aiming at its enemy. At this time, one of the orcs held something in his hands and raised it up. He was kneeling and saying something in his own language, most likely a prayer. And below on the floor behind him were many more orcs who were also kneeling and saying words with him. Meanwhile, the shell was getting closer and closer to a certain building. Despite this, the orc continued to hold the object in his hands and say a prayer. The player simply put his hand to his face and said that if this were reality, prayers would not help them. However, this is not reality, and prayers can actually bring salvation. Green smoke is created in the sky to stop the projectile, and the smoke, which had already acquired a certain shape, was actually able to stop the projectile. The smoke took the form of a deity, who grabbed the projectile with his hand. The first player was not surprised by what he saw, and immediately figured out the strategy his opponent was following. The second player was delighted at how he was able to dodge the enemy attack, and hoped that his opponent saw it. He stood on the giant's shoulder and confirmed that his opponent was right about the strategy. The player who had the second server rank asks if the opponent will surrender. Now it became clear to the first player why the opponent had fought with confidence from the very beginning. Even though the orc race's specialty allows for population expansion, it's still incredible how quickly he was able to gain so much faith and use special checks. And in the meantime, he was secretly preparing to fight back against technological civilization, and calling on the spirit was also a good idea. However, for the first player, everything was obvious from the very beginning, which makes him look indifferent to the game. After all, as he knows, there are spaces much larger than the sky. There was a satellite in space that, on command, fired 3 projectiles downwards. They flew down rapidly, constantly gaining speed. What he saw left the second player perplexed. He was greatly surprised by the rapid mass destruction attack immediately after the last one. He orders his summoned spirit to stop the projectiles that are about to reach their target. But the first player calmly says that it is impossible to stop this attack, because the shells that were supposed to destroy the palace were made of tungsten. And taking into account the accumulated gravitational acceleration, the giant will not be able to stop them with his own strength. The shells passed right through the giant, leaving 3 holes in it. And after the giant, they continued to fall down and finally reached their goal. The projectile that hit the ground threw several large stones into the air. With its weight, it created a large shock wave that lifted more rocks into the air and broke the surface. Blood was flowing from under one of the rods and a hand was visible, and next to it a cross, which had previously been held in the hands. The underground temple was destroyed along with the palace, and now they were engulfed in flames that destroyed what was left after the attack. The second player begins to panic because all the faith he has carefully cultivated will evaporate. Suddenly, the summoned giant began to evaporate. After all, when faith disappears, the apostles disappear along with it. The battle ends, and the system recognizes Nebula with rank 1 as the winner. The loser turns to the winner and indignantly demands a rematch, promising that next time he will definitely win. Meanwhile, the player calmly looked at the monitor, putting his hand to his face while his opponent was indignant at the loss. He receives a message about a rematch and reaches out his hand to give his answer. After playing another game, the guy sat there and was upset that the other player offered a rematch, but nothing changed. Looking at his achievements, the guy was sad that there were no updates in the game, and he had completed all the achievements to maintain the first-rank place. The guy stretches in his chair, but a sudden notification interrupts his train of thought. He looks at his phone indifferently, not particularly interested in who the notification is from. Leaving the game for a while, he wonders why anyone needs him at such a late hour. Returning to his desk, he saw a notification that he was the only one who had managed to achieve all the game achievements. Also, after reading that this is only beta testing and that Nebula will be allowed to a closed screening, the guy is surprised that this was early access and the official release will be later. When the guy receives a notification asking whether he agrees to a private screening, he decides to agree after all. When his character is transported to a new location, he appears indifferent for a while. But very soon his eyes open wider, amazed at what he sees. He found himself in a beautiful place where there was only space and a small area, in the center of which an area was illuminated in pink. At first the guy decides that it is a temple, but upon closer inspection it reminds him more of ruins. Raising his head and looking high up, he wonders if this might all be a dream. But his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by an unfamiliar voice from behind, which replied that this was not a dream. Turning around, the player sees an unknown man in a cloak and hood who says that Nebula has been chosen. The unknown man holds one hand behind his back and the other in front and asks permission to greet Nebula, whose real name was Steven. Hearing this, the guy wondered how they knew his real name. Looking around, the guy couldn't understand what all this meant. But suddenly he notices the presence of many shadows, which were very reminiscent of people or similar to them. Steven stared at them, wondering who they were. Suddenly, a man in a cloak comes forward and says that perhaps some of the players already know him, and they hide their faces so that the game is fair. Continuing to walk forward, the man says that since everyone is already interested, they can get down to business. Standing in front of Steven, the man stretches his arms high up. Most likely, the hands were pointing specifically at the Earth, since our hero paid attention to it. The boy wonders if this is the real Earth, but later decides that it is not. Again, with indifference, the boy decides that this is a world he has already seen many times. In his opinion, all this is just a game, the name of which is the Lost World. Pointing his hand towards Earth, the man continues to explain what the player must do in this lost world. The guy stood and, like many other players, calmly listened to what was being said to them. The speaker took a long time to make his announcement, which created tension among those present. Finally, he says that they are destined to become a real god. Hearing this, the players are surprised because apparently they did not expect to hear this at all, or were hoping for something else. Steven couldn't hear the other players, but he could sense the confusion around him. While he watched the other players, whom he could not see, the man continued to speak. Pointing to the Earth, the man says that the Lost World is not just a video game, but an Earth that the gods have abandoned. He went on to say that an incredible civilization once flourished on this land. Different races were able to live in harmony and relied on each other when necessary. But one day something went wrong and everything changed for the worse. One of the gods who lived there woke up in the middle of the night. And for some unknown reason, he was one of the first to leave this world, and that is why the time of new gods came. The man finished his short story, and there was silence in the air for a moment. But very soon he continues that the game was created to find a more suitable god for this planet. And those who have gathered here today can try to become a real god. The man continues to explain that everything will be very similar to the Lost World. At first, no one will believe in them, but if they give a reason, then their people will believe in them. Then, they will be able to become the only god of the entire planet, and will be able to do whatever they want, and all their dreams will become reality in an instant. Steven put his hand to his chin and thought deeply about the words he had just heard. He draws attention to himself when he asks the man what will happen if he gives up. To his question, he receives the answer that if someone gives up now, they will go back to their world and forget about what happened. And when Steven asks what if he gives up after the game has started, he is told that he will not have such an opportunity. The guy continues to ask his questions and asks what if another god defeats him. Perhaps not expecting such a question, the man remained silent for a while, but after a few moments he began to speak. He replies that in that case, the players will die. What he heard made the guy slightly surprised and think deeply. He smiles when he realizes that they are all risking their lives. Standing in front of everyone present, our hero decides that he has no reason to give up. Taking something out of his cloak, the man asks those present to decide whether they will go further or not. And for those who decide to continue, he lays the cards on the table in one smooth motion. And after that, he says that those who agree will begin their journey with a small race. Steven decides that everything is like in the game, and now they just need to choose one of the lower races. But something nearby distracts him from his thoughts, and he turns his gaze there. He notices how people start to give up. Those who gave up begin to disappear into thin air, and Steven counts such players. Apparently not particularly wanting to give himself away and make unnecessary movements, the guy only glances at those who surrendered. At this point, he has already managed to count 5 players who have refused to go further. Turning around, he believes that the initial number of people converges with the maximum number of players, and there were 32 of them. It turns out that now there are only 27 players left. When those who have surrendered have left, the man gestures to the cards and asks them to choose one. But our hero is a little surprised that he is the first to do this. Without thinking twice, he takes the first card he comes across and assumes that the choice is given according to the place in the ranking system. When the guy turns the card over to examine it, his eyes widen in surprise. The guy starts to say something, but his sentence is cut off. His sentence is cut off so that I can wish you, dear YouTube viewer and friend, pleasant viewing and a good day. A magic circle appeared under his feet and his body began to dissolve and rise into the air. After choosing a card, the player was immediately transported to the planet he had drawn. Now our hero was transported to his planet, and he was approaching its surface faster and faster. There was a lot of greenery on his planet, which made it very similar to Earth. A frog sitting in the water noticed a butterfly fluttering above its head. But suddenly she turns her gaze from the butterfly down to the fish that was swimming very close. Having grabbed the huge fish with both paws, the frog began to rejoice at its catch. Immediately after this, another frog appears, who is also happy about the big catch, while the hunter says that there will be fish for dinner today. But suddenly the second frog notices a blue butterfly nearby. Looking at her, he says that he has never seen such a butterfly, but the second one asks what he cares about the butterfly and is glad that today he will not have to eat beetles. Later, the blue butterfly flies to another place and lands on someone's hand. Thanks to her, Stephen learns about the humanoid frogs that live here. Looking for a small race of insects, Stephen says that insects are comparable to birds and are very useful in the beginning. But something about this situation doesn't suit the guy, and he thinks about it. The spawn point is on the eastern edge of the continent, meaning there won't be much fighting. Because of the early enrichment strategy, early aggression will not be easy to use. In this case, he decides to choose the race that will eat insects. Because of this, he begins to consider the first candidates, humanoid frogs. But the guy is very concerned about the number of tribes. With 500 tribes to choose from, it is difficult to make a choice. Suddenly, the flow of his thoughts is interrupted by one of the screens on which the number 10 appears. In the Lost World, the player's influence on a creature is directly related to the level of faith, but the frog's faith is not enough to make them do anything. After these candidates are rejected, Stephen wonders what other tribes are out there. Humanoid lizards walked in a chain, one after another, across the hot desert. They immediately attract Stephen's attention because they also feed on insects. Moreover, they are able to survive without water, and it seems that they separated from the main group, which played into Stephen's hands. There were many wounded in this group whose wounds still hurt. There were also several old people there who also had difficulty moving, and at the very end was the lizard that suffered the most. Just one look at him, Stephen immediately guesses that this lizard used to be in the main group, and most likely he was expelled as a result of a power struggle. This is the hardest time for this lizard because most likely he will be rejected by everyone, which Stephen guesses. And taking advantage of someone else's problem, the guy decides to give the lizard a miracle so that he will believe in the existence of God. But this lizard is a very fragile creature in the opinion of our hero. The guy looks at the lizard for a while, weighing his decision. But in the end, he still decides to target the lizard, who was lagging far behind his group. The humanoid lizards walked for a very long time through the hot desert, which is why they were already very tired. Suddenly, someone notices a gazelle in the distance and tells the others about it, which immediately perks up the others. The poor animal was lying on the ground and its hind leg was covered in blood. Hungry lizards take advantage of the opportunity and immediately pounce on the animal, which has no way to escape. While they are enjoying the meat, which they have not seen for a long time, the wounded and old people sit down in the distance and do not even try to come closer to eat. The old man smiled sadly that the old and wounded would not get any food, and the lizard that Stephen was aiming at looked at his wound, which had already begun to fester. A group of strong lizards ate fresh meat with pleasure. Now all that was left of the gazelle was a skeleton, and the lizards were upset that it all ended so quickly. But according to many, the food has not run out, because bone marrow is also very nutritious, which is why one lizard takes a bone in his hands. He decides to try the bone marrow, but someone snatches the bone from his paws just as he's about to bite. The lizard looks up in surprise at his comrade who took the bone and asks what's going on. By lifting the bone slightly upwards, the lizard says that they had enough food and this should be left for those who cannot hunt. After this, the lizard collects all the remaining bones and leaves with them. He silently walks up to a group of other lizards and throws the bones in front of them, causing their eyes to immediately widen. Each of them immediately grabs a bone and begins to gnaw on it. The wounded lizard looked the worst of all because of his wound, but he also took a bone for himself. When the lizard returns to his group, the others ask him if he really wants to do this. Not wanting to beat around the bush, one of the lizards immediately says that the lizard with the wound on his shoulder will soon die, and the second agrees that his wound is already festering. Yahello only turns away when he hears that the lizard should have died a long time ago, and it is surprising that he is still alive. Suddenly, one of the lizards admits that many of them were able to survive because Rockrak took the blow of the saber-toothed tiger on himself. But even with such help, he will soon die, and the living need food. After listening to the others, Zhao asks how they are not ashamed, but they are only slightly surprised. Most of the lizards slept in an embrace, or at least close to each other, but Rockrak lay separately from everyone else. Even in his sleep, he winced at the pain in his shoulder. But suddenly opening his eyes, he notices a blue butterfly in front of him. Having become interested in the insect, the lizard, gritting his teeth, begins to rise. Leaning on his sore paw, he watches the butterfly, which has begun to move away from him. Suddenly, one of the lizards wakes up and asks the lizard lying next to him to look into the distance. Looking at Rockrak leaving, they decided that he finally wanted to leave. While Rockrak climbed the rocks, they decided to just watch him. Jowl also lay and silently watched Rockrak's actions. It was hard for Rockrak, but holding on to his sore paw, he continued to climb higher after the butterfly. It seemed that the lizard himself did not fully understand why he was doing this, and wondered if this was just a crazy fantasy. He is sure that he was the only one who noticed the butterfly, and following it, he hopes that it means at least something. With the last of his strength, the lizard continues to rise after the blue glowing butterfly. Rockrak had almost reached the place where the butterfly had led him and was wondering about the meaning of what was happening. When the lizard reaches its destination, its eyes widen at what it sees. At the top of the hill was a pile of beetles left by someone, which formed a tower that rose into the sky. Rockrak is surprised by his find and realizes that this is enough for their entire group. After this, Steven receives a notification that the humanoid lizards have seen a miracle, which the guy is undoubtedly happy about. From his screen, he watched the lizards gobble up his gift, which Steven thought would last him several days. Continuing to look at the happy lizards, Steven continued to think about his next move. But his thought is abruptly interrupted by something he saw on one of his screens. Steven noticed that by pointing to the butterfly, Rockrak himself began to talk about the miracle that he was able to see. Then Steven remembers that creatures with great will can make decisions on their own, and many lizards look at the beetles and think about the story they heard. Steven receives a notification that the Rockrak tribe has discovered a deity called the Nameless Bug God, a name that greatly surprises our hero. With a heavy sigh, the boy accepts his temporary name and agrees that at first no one has beautiful names. Lost in his thoughts, Steven looks down somewhere far below for a while. He looked at Rockrak, who was standing by the fire and had attracted attention after the story was told. The boy smiles at the thought that Rockrak is now important to him. But without a doubt, Nebula will also later become important to the lizard, who saw a miracle at the most difficult moment of his life. In the new day that had come, the heat was still there in the middle of the desert, and the blue butterfly continued to flutter, flying not far from the tribe. Continuing to follow the butterfly with his gaze, Rockrak covers his face from the sun with his paw and thinks about whether to follow the butterfly again. The voiced idea was, of course, heard by fellow tribesmen, and they were delighted at the opportunity to eat beetles again. As Rockrak continued to stare into the distance, one of the lizards asked if he would go for the vision again. To this, the lizard calmly replies that winter is coming, and beetles appear on the same side as cold winds. With his head down, he sadly reports that if they continue in that direction, they will freeze to death. Hearing this, the interlocutor begins to worry and nervously suggests going in the other direction. Turning slightly towards his interlocutor, the lizard informs that they cannot do that either. Looking back at the desert, Rockrak reports that these lands are empty. Looking up at the sky, the lizard asks himself what the meaning of these visions is, but he himself does not know. All this time, Steven watched the lizard, who does not know the meaning of what he saw, but still decides to follow his visions. The guy comes to the conclusion that the humanoid lizards have little faith, but at the initial stages, he can do nothing about it. While thinking about his next move, Steven looked at the unavailable skill that required 10 faith points. Rockrak led the entire group and held a young lizard on his back. The lizard took charge of the entire group and led everyone after the blue butterfly to unknown places. And as long as Rockrak believes in God, a future awaits him that he could not even dream of. Arriving at the destination, everyone was very surprised, and Rockrak immediately put the cub down on the ground, who did not take his eyes off what he saw. Turning to the others, Rockrak begins to speak loudly so that everyone can hear him. Pointing his hand at the open area, he reports that the nameless god of bugs has led them to the shelter. What they see amazes the lizards, and some smile with happiness, while others stand with their mouths open in surprise. Everyone was shouting and rejoicing at the new place, and Rockrak was rejoicing, but he was just smiling, more likely because his visions really meant something. Faith in God has increased, which has allowed several skills to be upgraded. Suddenly, Steven announces that if Rockrak wants to know what his god desires, he will become a priest. The guy wants Rockrak to convey his will to his fellow tribesmen, and, accidentally or not, at that very moment Rockrak raises his head up. At that moment, the lizard is enveloped in a pillar of light, which is a blessing that can help Rockrak, according to Steven. It was deep night, and all the lizards, including Rockrak, were in a deep sleep. Suddenly, a firefly flies in and lands on the sleeping lizard's shoulder. At the same time, through his sleep, Rockrak begins to hear a strange, unfamiliar voice calling his name. Suddenly, he finds himself in an unknown place where there is no end and where everything is illuminated by white light. Looking up at the butterflies, Rockrak asks himself where he is now and whether this is a dream. The voice continues calling the lizard's name as one of the butterflies present lands on his nose. But finally, Rockrak notices someone nearby and asks who he is. In the shadows stood a figure resembling a humanoid lizard and wrapped in a cloak. Suddenly, the stranger slowly extends his hand towards Rockrak. Rockrak does not understand the meaning of the gesture and continues to just look in surprise. Then the stranger asks if the lizard will take his hand. Rockrak is wary of the stranger and asks about his goals before doing what he wants from him. When a stranger hears a question, he changes the position of his hand and points his index finger somewhere down. Only at that moment does Rockrak lower his head and notice that he is holding the skull of some animal in his hands. After discovering the find, the lizard lifts the skull higher in order to examine it. Rockrak stares at the skull for a moment and begins to realize that it is the skull of a buffalo. After this, he begins to stretch out his arms and move the skull further away from himself. Automatically or not, he places the skull on the stranger's face. Now, looking at the one who was nearby, it begins to seem to him that the stranger is the nameless god of beetles. The next morning, Rockrak gathered all the lizards together and informed them of what was important in his opinion. As soon as he woke up, he immediately wanted to share the dream with the others in order to inform them or listen to their guesses about what it meant. After Rockrak has finished his story, one of the lizards asks if God is asking the beetles to sacrifice a buffalo. At this point, Yahello intervenes and says that to catch the buffalo they will have to go far into the wasteland and it is very dangerous. When someone objects that this is what the god who brought them here wants, Yahello firmly replies that he will not put the entire tribe in danger. Hunting a buffalo is a huge risk to life and the entire tribe will have to fight to kill it. Yahello asks if they leave, who will look after the children and the elderly. Unable to come up with an answer to this, others simply reply that it sounds convincing. Clutching his spear tighter in his hands, Rockrak agrees that it is wrong to put the entire tribe in danger. To the surprise of his fellow tribesmen, he firmly says that he will go alone. Upon hearing the crazy thing Rockrak is about to do, Yahello immediately steps forward and says that Rockrak cannot do it alone. But turning around, the lizard firmly replies that he is not going there to die, but God gave him a blessing. Yahello asks doubtfully about the blessing he received. The wound on Rockrak's shoulder no longer festered and was covered with a dark crust. Pointing to his wound, the lizard says that it is hard to believe, but when he woke up, the wound had already healed. Moreover, his shoulder was covered with black scales. The lizard compares these scales to those of beetles, but Yahello still looks at his comrade doubtfully. Yahello closed his eyes and shook his paw from side to side, acknowledging the strangeness of the incident. But he still doesn't consider this a reason to go after the buffalo alone, and then Rockrak agrees with him. Suddenly, Rockrak tenses one of his paws so hard that the large muscles and protruding veins can be clearly seen. Replying that this would be an excuse to go after the buffalo alone, he swings his spear. And at high speed, he launches it into a palm tree, which was at a decent distance from them. The spear hits the middle of the tree and breaks it into two pieces. Everyone present was horrified by this sight and surprised by the strength of the one who had been dying just 2 days ago. Rockrak walked over to the tree and took back the spear, which had stuck into the ground after hitting its target. His fellow tribesmen immediately run up to him and are surprised that he hid such strength from them. An old man who had difficulty walking also comes up and says that it was a dried-up tree. But just recently, Rockrak was dying from the wound he received. Suddenly, one of the lizards notices something interesting in the distance and starts screaming, which makes Rockrak turn towards him. Rockrak also soon notices what delighted his fellow tribesmen, and it makes him smile. Wanting to draw the attention of the other lizards to this, he points his hand in that direction and beckons everyone closer. Rockrak happily informs everyone that there is a herd of buffalo nearby. A large herd of buffaloes ran at high speed, raising a huge cloud of dust into the air. Seeing the herd, Yahello couldn't believe it and began to deny it. As Rockrak looked at the herd that passed below them, Yahello couldn't understand how a herd of buffalo that always moved along the same route could have gotten in their way. Rockrak raised his spear and began to say that there was no point in thinking about it now. The lizard makes a dash forward, and Yahello, who was unable to stop him, is left behind. Rapidly approaching his yet unattained goal, Rockrak was already triumphant like a winner. As he drew his spear back to strike, he joyfully cried out that today they would be freed from hunger. Finally getting close enough to his target, the lizard launches his spear downwards. With one well-aimed throw, he hits the buffalo right in the head, causing the dead body to fall down and frighten the other animals. Seeing the huge lizards running towards them, the buffaloes immediately change their direction and try to escape their fate. Following Rockrak came other lizards, who now had gained fighting spirit and were heading straight for the buffaloes. And at that moment, Rockrak realized that God was sending them not only beetles, but also meat. When it was already dark, the lizards lit torches, which now illuminated a mountain of bones, and above them hung the body of a buffalo whose blood had stained the white bones red. Kneeling down and raising his hands up, Rockrak began to make an offering to his nameless god. The rest of the lizards stood behind and listened to the request for God to accept their gift, even if it was pitiful. When Rockrak finished his sentence, the others repeated the request and bowed their heads slightly forward. Stephen notices that the ritual was performed carelessly, but the most important thing is the sincerity of intentions. He managed to get even more points than he expected, which means that Stephen turned out to be a good priest. Considering the time it took them to complete the job, it turned out very well. Suddenly, Stephen remembers that it was difficult to attract the buffalo because he was not the god of the grass they ate. Because of this, we had to resort to ingenuity and use improvised means. Thanks to the insects, Stephen destroyed almost all the grass, except for some tufts that formed a chain. The buffaloes ate the remaining grass and thus became trapped. Stephen remembers something else important and raises his hand to his chin. Looking at the lizards who were still eating, he wonders if they ate the baby buffalo. But after a few moments, the guy admits that it is stupid to expect them to know anything about cattle breeding at this early stage. Their tribe is small for this oasis, which will allow them to survive here for several years. At the moment, they know nothing about crop production or livestock farming, which will make survival much more difficult. Tapping his fingers on the chair, the guy thinks about what he can do about this situation. He admits that it is difficult to discover some knowledge on his own, but he cannot say it directly, because then he would break the rules of the game. He continues that a way can always be found, but it will take time. And then Stephen decides to start with one blessing. Suddenly, a light path descends from the sky onto Rockrak, causing his body to begin to glow slightly. Someone approaches the unsleeping Rockrak and is surprised that he has already woken up, but he did not go to bed because he was watching the altar. Now Rockrak had dark scales and new clothes, and he turns to the newcomer to report that he had another dream last night. Yahello, who also had black scales, wondered what the god was trying to convey this time. But Rockrak finds it difficult to interpret his dream, and he only remembers that the altar shook strangely. According to the lizard, there were no more fish in the pond that had protected them for many years, and the earth dried out so much that nothing could grow on it anymore. Hearing this, Yahello only calmly replies that this did not happen, and Rockrak agrees with him. Then Yahello continues to tell Rockrak, who was climbing somewhere, that there is no point in worrying because God will protect them. To this, Rockrak replied that he also believed in their God, but God's will often goes hand in hand with difficulties. Climbing to the top of the altar, he continues that if they cannot understand the meaning, then it will be tantamount to betrayal, in his opinion. Rockrak was afraid of exactly this, and Yahello listened to him calmly. But suddenly, Rockrak asks his interlocutor to quickly climb up and look at something. When Yahello finally reaches the top, Rockrak points his finger somewhere far beyond the horizon. Looking closely, Yahello notices some movement in the distance, which raised a lot of sand dust into the air. Seeing this, Rockrak finally understands what God meant in his dream and why the altar was shaking. Taking a closer look at the group of lizards that was approaching, our hero recognizes those who drove them out of the tribe. Yahello is very surprised that they have come this far, but Rockrak does not share the surprise. He continues to examine the lizard that was walking ahead of everyone, and notes that its scales are the same blue as theirs once were. But what surprised him more was that some of the lizards were riding huge animals that inspired fear with their appearance. Judging by the numbers, Rockrak assumed that the entire tribe was on the move. Because of this, Yahello comes to the realization that their homeland of green swamps is completely depleted. Continuing to look at the approaching animals, Rockrak wants to express his thought. But Yahello interrupts him and says that God has taken all the fertile lands, but Rockrak calmly replies that they cannot know this. Yahello becomes wary that they know the location of the refuge, but Rockrak says that their oasis is in a depression in the mountain and cannot be seen until you climb up. Hearing this, Yahello calms down a little and hopes that they will simply pass by, but suddenly someone's loud voice is heard. Suddenly, some lizard shouts to those passing by that their shelter belongs to the nameless god of bugs. The whole picture looked as if the lizard was trying very hard to attract attention to itself, and it successfully succeeded in doing so. Seeing him, the leader of the group looked as if he was surprised by such a stupid performance, and the beast below him showed his teeth. Rockrak clutches his head and remembers that today Yura's patrol and Yahello also clutches his head, confirming this. But after that, Rockrak puts paw on his friend's shoulder and asks him not to worry. Jumping up from his place, the lizard assumes that this is God's plan. When he reaches for his spear and takes it in his paw, Yahello asks what he is talking about. Jumping down from the altar towards his companion, Yahello asks if Rockrak thinks that God himself created this situation to test them. Rockrak turns slightly to his interlocutor and says that maybe this is not a test at all, but a mission. A mission to accept and save those who were once their fellow tribesmen. Yahello is still trying to dissuade his friend from the idea that has entered his head, but Rockrak continues to move forward. Yahello remembers the actions of that leader and says that if he were able to gain something spiritual, he would not have driven out all the weak from his tribe. But suddenly Rockrak notices a blue butterfly in the sky. The miracle he saw gave the lizard even more confidence that he was not mistaken. And if this is another sign from God, then he must do everything in his power. Meanwhile, Stephen has been watching everything from afar and is surprised that Rockrak understood his plan. In his opinion, the Rockrak and Bluescale tribes should decide for the sake of increasing the number of believers and technological development. But what remains strange is that Rockrak himself made this decision. Apparently, this was directly related to the willpower, which the lizard had 14 points. In his mind, Stephen wonders if the lizard thought that the Bluescale tribe's appearance was the work of their god. But as it turns out, Rockrak is partly right. Stephen is very happy to have a leader with high willpower at his disposal. Stephen decides that if he can impose a strong faith on them, he will no longer have to make all the decisions himself. And then the lizards will be able to use the orders of their god more effectively. The Bluescale tribe stood below, and our lizard tribe stood on the hill, preparing to fight back against the enemy if necessary. Suddenly, the leader of the Bluescale tribe calls the guy who was shouting earlier and asks if they live here. The lizard is outraged by the way he was addressed and perceives it as an insult, while those standing nearby confirm that this is their land. Hearing the answer, the big guy just grins and asks again if she's serious now. The big guy immediately asks what is in their shelter, but now they refuse to answer him, saying that it is none of his business. But suddenly, the big guy turns his gaze to someone who answers that they have trees and fertile land. Stepping forward, Rockrak continued to say that they had prey and, most importantly, God. Having heard about God, the big guy asks again, and Rockrak continues that this land belongs to the nameless god of bugs. Looking down at his interlocutor, the big guy says that he doesn't understand the meaning of the statement and doesn't see any point in continuing the discussion. Rockrak calmly listens to the demand to leave on good terms. Continuing his thought, the big guy says that if they leave now, he will not attack them. Although the big man didn't know how big the Rockrak tribe was, he was convinced that their tribe would not be able to resist his tribe. Putting his finger to his head, he continues to say that since ancient times, a leader needed to be able to count. But after listening to his interlocutor, Rockrak only closes his eyes and turns his head slightly to the side. And then he thrusts his spear forward, the tip of which glittered in the sun. Pointing his spear at the big guy, Rockrak says that he doesn't want to fight him. But what he heard angered the lizard and made him grimace. Some of the Bluescale tribe stood with knives in their paws, apparently ready to engage in battle if their leader demanded it. But Rockrak said that the unfortunate and the disadvantaged can always find refuge in the arms of God, and then God will be able to take care of them. But after listening to Rockrak's speech, the big guy only begins to laugh loudly and disgustingly at what he heard. Tugging at the reins, he sums up that Rockrak still can't count. Tilting his head slightly, Rockrak asks if the big man really thinks so and adds that he does not know God. Having finished his sentence, with one sharp movement, the lizard thrusts his spear forward and gets into a fighting stance. The big guy, who really had nothing spiritual in him, just snorts and replies that this is all nonsense. Tired of pointless talk, he sends his huge beast into battle. Seeing the beast baring its teeth at him, Rockrak grits his teeth and begins to address his god. Clutching the spear in his hands even tighter, he asks God to allow him to meet his enemy face to face. Looking at the predator hanging above, he continues to ask to be gifted with courage and strength. The beast begins to attack and very soon reaches the lizard, which is much smaller in size. With just one swing of his huge paw, he manages to break the lizard's spear like a stick. Rockrak's eyes grow larger as he sees the state his spear has become just a second later. Seeing how shocked his opponent is, the big guy grins again and calls him an idiot. The beast was about to strike again with its paw and crush the lizard, who now did not even have any weapons to defend himself. Stephen notices in time that his tribe leader is about to be killed and pauses the game. Trying to figure out what to do next, Stephen turns his attention to his other monitor. The guy gets a sign asking if he's going to use the new skill, and he agrees. Rockrak continued to look at the paw that was already hanging over him and that covered his body with its shadow. But suddenly, for a moment, a spark appears in his gaze. The lizard saw something bright, reminiscent of a star, approaching him from the sky. Finally, the beast's paw reaches the ground and with its blow throws several light stones to the sides. The big guy only enjoys the reprisal against his enemy. But suddenly he notices how the surprised animal raises its paw and notices that there is nothing under it. The animal immediately turns to the lizard, which avoided the blow at very high speed, leaving behind 2 small traces of dust. Stephen empowered Rockrak, and now his body was covered in small blue flames. Looking at the still-living enemy, the big guy does not understand how he managed to avoid the blow. But not wanting to miss any more, he sends his beast into battle again. Radiating new strength, Rockrak no longer appears frightened of the enemy and, moreover, is not even interested in the battle. Suddenly, he starts analyzing the enemy in front of him and looks at his status. The tribe's leader was only level 2 and didn't have particularly good stats, which meant Rockrak would have been able to handle him alone. However, in this situation, the problem was not him, but the animal that was in his power. But since Stephen gave him new power, there won't be any problems with the beast now. The lizard makes just a few dashes and immediately catches up with the beast, which did not expect such speed. Running quickly, Rockrak immediately grabs the beast by the head. He's able to do this because the god's avatar skill gives the user additional characteristics. The big guy, like his beast, is very surprised by the strength of his opponent. Thanks to his strength, which now reached 630 points, Rockrak easily lowers the beast's head to the ground with a sharp movement. Everything happens so quickly that the leader of the blue-scaled tribe doesn't even understand what happened. Unexpectedly for the beast and its owner, they turned over in the air and were already flying to the ground. The blue-scale lizard men looked on in amazement as the powerful beast was crushed so easily. The overwhelming difference in strength surprised even the Rockrak tribe. Even many of his tribe are watching what happened with their mouths open. The beast lay belly up, unable to fight any longer, and its owner was crushed under the huge carcass. Having recovered from the shock, the Rockrak tribe begins to express the following reaction: sincere delight. But for some reason, at this very moment, Rockrak looks alien to them and looks at them with a gaze that is not his own. This again makes everyone surprised, and Yahello puts out his hand, showing with his gesture that no one should approach Rockrak now. Trying to get out from under the huge carcass, the big guy continued to shower Rockrak with many insults. Finally, he manages to get out from under the carcass and reach the knife that was lying nearby. Grabbing the weapon, the lizard rushes at the enemy, who at that moment was looking back, not in front of him. The blue-scale tribe chieftain could not accept the fact that his calculations might be inaccurate, and so he wanted to finish what he started. But still, without looking forward, Rockrak puts his hand in front of himself. And then he hits the lizard with the back of his hand and immediately ends the fight. Having received a very strong blow, the lizard immediately falls limply to its knees. Turning to the other lizards from the alien tribe, he calmly asks who will be next. But seeing the full power of the enemy, the members of the blue-scale tribe immediately throw their weapons to the ground. They all immediately fell to their knees and began to bow their heads and at the same time swear their allegiance. Immediately after this, the blue light leaves Rockrak's body. Looking down at their body, Rockrak can't believe what just happened. Looking at the fallen enemies, Rockrak wondered if their god had just controlled his body, because everything happened as if in a dream. Watching what was happening on his screen, Steven only chuckled. It was late at night and the two tribes united under the altar and loudly discussed something. Suddenly, one lizard from the blue-scale tribe asks again that previously the black lizards were part of their tribe and were driven out into the wasteland. The interlocutor continues to ask why they have black scales then, and they answer that this is the whole point. The lizard continues to say that through worshipping the nameless god of bugs, they were able to change and become stronger, and these words delight the listeners. Many of their tribe were sitting near the fires at that moment, warming their limbs by bringing them closer to the fire. The words that otherwise the lizards would have died make the blue lizard think deeply about what he heard. Looking at the altar, he says that the power of their god is very immense. Rockrak and Yahello were sitting separately from everyone else, and Yahello asks his friend if he really doesn't remember what happened today. Without waiting for an answer from Rockrak, who was looking at the ground, Yahello continues to ask how a lizard with such great strength could exist. Yahello couldn't imagine such a thing and worriedly asks if everything will be okay, but looking at his interlocutor, Rockrak asks again. Turning to the rest of the lizards, Yahello says that with their arrival, the tribe has become 6 times larger, and there are too many of them, which means this oasis will begin to deplete very quickly. Rockrak lowers his head again and considers his friend's words. He finally gets up and announces that they will have to leave, but Yahello is very surprised by this. With a worried look, he asks if they will have to go into the wasteland again, since they cannot wander endlessly in search. But Rockrak firmly replies that they can do it because the answer is somewhere in those lands. Looking around at his entire tribe, Rockrak continues to say that it was the appearance of their old brothers that became a clue from God. The next day, the beast of the defeated lizard was tied to a tree and was angry at those who guarded it. The lizards get too close, causing the drake to lash out with its tail and hit one of the guards. While the victim flies forward, his partner steps forward with a spear. But Manhwa is not afraid of the lizard and again tries to attack, showing his grin. The beast was so strong that it slightly pulled the tree towards itself, and the guards were worried that it would escape. Yor starts yelling at the animal that he will be punished for bad behavior. But at that moment, someone's hand falls on the lizard's shoulder. Seeing the new arrival, Drake freezes and no longer grins. Rockrak arrived at the scene carrying a carrot in his hand. Seeing the lizard, Manhwa immediately recognizes it and remembers their previous meeting. The beast is very frightened of Rockrak and begins to retreat. But Rockrak approaches him and holding out a carrot, offers the animal to eat it. The beast is very surprised when he sees that he will not be attacked and is only offered food. Manhwa carefully approaches the carrot and begins to sniff it. After sniffing and making sure that the offered food is edible, he begins to bite off a little. The guards, who had previously pointed their spears at the beast, are surprised at how easily Rockrak found a common language with the animal. After Manhwa has finished the carrots, he begins to caress Rockrak's hands, and the lizard guesses that he is asking for more food. So he immediately throws Drake a few more carrots, which the beast immediately eats with great pleasure. Looking at the animal, Rockrak thinks that if he is still alive, it means God has plans for him. Having finished the recently offered carrots, Manhwa raises his head and looks at Rockrak again. Guessing what Manhwa wants, Rockrak smiles and says that if Drake wants to be on his side, then he should learn patience. Manhwa stood and listened to what the lizard was telling him, and for some time did not show any further reaction. But realizing that they won't give him more food, the Drake falls to the ground and looks at Rockrak with a sad look. After this, Rockrak begins to leave and asks the guards to notify him if Manhwa suddenly starts to act up again. But lost in thought about something, Yor didn't answer the leader and continued to stare intently at the Drake. A little later, a lizard with blue scales appeared in the company of Rockrak and Yahello, and Rockrak was examining something in his hands. Twirling the knife in his hands, he asked the lizard if he can do something similar. The lizard continues to say that if it weren't for the stubbornness of the previous leader, he would have made something better long ago. But Yahello turns and asks how it's all connected, to which he replies that it's the trees. Slightly surprised, Rockrak asks the lizard again, and he again answers convincingly. According to the blue lizard, they used a lot of trees when creating the weapon. Rockrak looks at his interlocutor and asks if trees are needed for fires, but the lizard replies that by burning wood, they received a special flammable material. Continuing to twist the knife in his hands, Rockrak thinks about the lizard's words. Then, without taking his eyes off the knife, he replies that he will think about the proposed idea and make a decision tomorrow. As the lizard leaves, Rockrak finally looks up from the knife in his hands and looks ahead. He is a little surprised when he sees that the next lizard who wants to talk to him is missing his left front paw. A stranger approaches and reports that he heard that Rockrak was looking for someone who could accompany them through the desert. Realizing where the conversation is heading, Rockrak asks his interlocutor if he is a wanderer. The lizard smiles and confirms that he is a wanderer who is constantly in search of shelter. Looking down a little ahead, he reports that during his travels he has learned to find his way. What they heard immediately interests Rockrak and Yahello. The wanderer continues to talk about how he knows of several fertile lands that can free the tribe from hunger. But with an awkward smile, he says that he cannot be sure that these lands have not been occupied by someone else. Looking at his interlocutor, Rockrak asks if others could have found these places, and sitting down, the wanderer answers that this could have happened. Hearing this, Rockrak lowers his head slightly and says that everything is fine. Raising his head again, he firmly says that even if the lands are already occupied by someone, they will simply need to win and take the lands for themselves. To this, the wanderer replies that if Rockrak is determined enough, the lizard will trust the leader. But after listening to his interlocutor, Rockrak immediately asks how the wanderer can earn his trust. Most likely, not expecting such a question, the lizard was a little embarrassed and thought about what he could offer. After a few moments, he silently raised his index finger to the sky. The lizard claimed that his answer was there, and Rockrak and Yahello looked up to where the finger was pointing, not understanding what the wanderer meant. When the lizards look up, all they see is an endless blue sky with clouds wandering across it. Our heroes see only the sky, but the wanderer replies that it is not just the sky. When night fell, Rockrak and the wanderer met again in the same place, and Rockrak guessed that it was in the stars. Continuing to look at the night sky, Rockrak asks if the stars move, and the wanderer confirms that there is something like that. The wanderer continues to say that Rockrak noticed correctly and the stars are in some kind of movement, and he managed to find his own rules. He continued to claim that if you knew the paths of the stars, you could find your way anywhere. But for now, for Rockrak, this was doubtful. The wanderer offers to share some information about the star paths, and if after a few days of observation everything comes together, he hopes that he can gain Rockrak's trust. The lizard spent many hours talking about the stars in the sky, and the wanderer constantly pointed his finger at the sky, explaining something about the stars. When enough time had passed and the wanderer began to leave, he asked to meet again at the same time and place, and Rockrak agreed. As soon as the wanderer left the leader, Yor came to him, deeply thinking about something. Rockrak quickly notices him and turns around asking if Manhwa is causing problems, but Yor assures that everything is fine. According to the lizard, although the Drake was still not happy, as soon as they started giving him food on time, he softened. Although Rockrak continued to stare at the sky, he was delighted to hear this news. But suddenly Yor remembers that Yahello told them that they needed to find a way to move around the wasteland without the risk of starving. Finally, Rockrak breaks away from the stars and, turning to his interlocutor, confirms his friend's words. After this, Yor immediately begins to say that during the day, when he watched how Rockrak gave food to Manhwa and he calmed down, an idea came to him. He dared to suggest that this could be done not only with Drake, but also with other animals. Interested in his interlocutor's proposal, Rockrak asks what other animals they could try doing this with. Hearing the sudden question, Yor became a little embarrassed and tried to come up with an answer. After a few moments, he points his finger somewhere to the side, and Rockrak turns in the direction indicated. Yor suggests that they could try doing the same with buffalo, after which the system sends a notification that the Rakraka tribe has opened cattle breeding. It is said that at some point in human history, two branches appeared. In one of them, some people started to engage in plant growing. Others decided to devote themselves to cattle breeding. Continuing to watch his tribe on the monitor, Stephen remembers that even in the game itself, it was mentioned that plant growing is more stable. And this is understandable, because it is not for nothing that most civilizations begin their development near large bodies of water. However, the tribe that Stephen chose consisted of humanoid lizards. Lizards are physically very strong and adapt well to their environment, and that is why they need livestock farming the most. And now Stephen is seeing that knowledge has appeared in the tribe that will elevate them. He could watch this from one of his many screens. Now the tribe had ore processing, and Rakrak was watching the processing. Jowl was also present and leaned closer to the blacksmith in order to examine everything. Rakrak behaved with restraint. Jowl watched with open interest, and the blacksmith paid no attention to those present. Stephen watched and was pleased that the tribe had finally learned how to shape metal into the desired shape, although this weapon was significantly softer than bronze items. But considering that the Rakrak tribe had previously fought with stone tools, this is already a big progress. Thanks to his butterflies, Stephen was able to watch everything that was happening from the side, including the lizards who were examining the new weapon. But besides the new skill, they received another unexpected gift. Thanks to the Wanderer, the tribe now knew about astronomy. For several days now, Rakrak and the Wanderer had been discussing the stars in the sky. Now Rakrak pointed his finger at the sky and most likely asked the Wanderer his questions, although Stephen admitted that their knowledge could hardly be called astronomy now. But the guy hopes that in the distant future they will be able to use this knowledge correctly. When alone with each other, the lizards constantly and non-stop discussed something. Now left alone, Rakrak agrees with the Wanderer's words that the stars are the guide of the heavens. After standing on the hill for a while, he decides to sit down and look around his tribe's house. After sitting in silence for a while, the lizard raises his head again and decides to put his plan into action. It was still night, but all the lizards had already gathered around their altar. Rakrak, who called everyone together, begins to talk about how much time has passed since God brought them to these lands. And in such a short time, they even managed to meet their brothers, with whom they lived before their exile. Rakrak goes on to say that they could have abandoned their brothers, just as they abandoned them back then, and chosen to live alone, and then they would have lived longer lives here. Everyone listened attentively to the fact that if the Blue-Scale tribe had been abandoned, they would have died in the middle of the endless wastelands. But Rakrak believes that this is wrong because God wanted salvation, not rejection. Clenching his fist tighter, Rakrak says that this was supposed to be their highest good. Everyone stood silently and listened to the speech of their leader, not daring to make an unnecessary sound. Finally, Rakrak announces that at dawn they will leave this land. What they heard left everyone perplexed, and meanwhile Rakrak asked the Wanderer to come closer. When the Wanderer stands next to the chieftain, Rakrak announces that he has been instructing him for several days in the secrets of traveling on star maps, and Rakrak has managed to verify that the Wanderer is telling the truth. Now Rakrak solemnly announces that the Wanderer will lead them forward, and greatly surprises the man standing next to him. Jowl stood with his arms crossed over his chest and listened as their entire tribe was now ready to trust the Wanderer. Wanting to inform everyone about their path, Rakrak asks the Wanderer to tell everyone where he will lead them, which greatly confuses the lizard. After listening to the leader, the lizard silently raises his finger to the sky, and all the lizards look after him. The Wanderer informs that when the morning sun rises, they will go to the right of the place where it rises. And after that, they will have to walk forward for 10 days. And then turning right along the rotten river, they will walk for another 15 days. And immediately after that, another 3 days along the mountain fault. The Wanderer sums up where they will eventually end up and what they will give so much effort for. Their target is the endless forests, which are full of predators, tribes, and other creatures. Hearing the Wanderer's statement, Rakrak is glad that this place would be ideal for them. After this, he thanks the Wanderer and asks him to go back. When the Wanderer has left, the leader begins to slowly climb onto the altar. Meanwhile, those below closely watch the actions of their leader. Finally, Rakrak climbed to the top and proudly looked at his entire tribe. Suddenly, he unexpectedly calls out to Yura, which greatly surprises the lizard. Suddenly, Rakrak asks why they did not eat any of the buffalo that were caught yesterday. Yura is at a loss when asked this question and at first doesn't even know what to answer. Trying to pull himself together, the lizard begins to say in an uncertain voice that they were not very hungry. Looking down at the lizard, Rakrak wonders how the two are related. After hearing that everyone had tried their best to catch the buffalo, but the prey had never been tasted, Yura felt even more insecure. Yura also continues uncertainly that everyone really did work on the hunt. But he didn't eat anything because he didn't feel really hungry. Rakrak stood above all this time and calmly listened to his fellow tribesmen. Yura believed that if he could endure it now, he would be able to eat later when he was really hungry. That's what he decided. Thinking about Yura's statement, Rakrak looked at him intently. But finally, after a long silence, the leader begins to praise the lizard. This unexpected reaction really surprises Yura. Rakrak praises the lizard for wanting to eat the buffalo now, but holding back for the sake of his future. Hearing such praise addressed to him, the lizard standing below even blushed a little. When Rakrak asks if Yura will continue in the same spirit, the lizard confidently gives a positive answer and promises to do so until he gets hungry. Having praised the lizard again and spoken of the reward, Rakrak calls over the blacksmith, who is holding something in his paws. When Yura sees that they are bringing him a spear with an iron tip, he is speechless. The blacksmith approaches the lizard and without further ado hands him the spear. Having received the new item, Yura immediately raises it up, and the tip of the spear begins to shine from the light falling on it. Rakrak continues to say that all those who listened to Yura and overcame their desire for hunger are worthy of these spears, after which the lizards are given more spears. All the lizards accept the reward and look at the new weapon with delight. The blue-scale lizard men, who had been standing behind and watching the process, were delighted and wanted to have such a weapon for themselves. Watching Rakrak from afar, Yahello remembers that he had wondered what their leader's plan was, and now he had figured it out. But watching Rakrak's actions, something surprised the lizard. Rakrak walked closer to the altar and removed one of the skulls on it. Taking the skull in his hands and returning back, he addresses the tribe and asks everyone to come up one by one. The lizards watching this are only once again surprised by the actions of their leader. By placing the skull on his face, Rakrak bestows a blessing on the entire tribe, and he believes that their journey will be successful only if they themselves are patient and can maintain the restraint that they showed today. Taking another skull in his hands and holding it out to Yura's muzzle, he addresses the lizard. By placing the skull on his fellow tribesman's head, Rakrak gives him a new name, Bone Warrior. Yura can't contain how much he is touched by this will of God, so his eyes begin to water. Now Rakrak was illuminated by the bright morning sun, and he prepared to continue with his plan. When the whole ceremony was over, all the lizards of his tribe had one new spear each and a buffalo skull as a mask. Looking around, Rakrak announces that it is time to leave this divine place. But they should remember that God's will is with them, and therefore they are not tied to any place. Yahello and the Wanderer watched their leader from the sidelines the entire time, waiting for his next move on the leader's part. After a brief lull, Rakrak loudly asks everyone to let the nameless bug god into their heads. Rakrak cannot promise them that it will be easy, but they must continue to move forward fearlessly. Hearing that just as they had overcome the desire to eat the buffalo, they would also overcome this road, which would turn out to be to their advantage, the lizards were delighted by the chief's speech, and at the same time raised their spears upward. Rakrak believed that they must go forward, and the nameless god of bugs would be with them. And thinking about this, he closes his eyes and lifts his head up, as if closer to the morning light. But after this, he thinks about the fact that he arbitrarily expressed God's will. Feeling guilty for what he had done, the lizard asks his god for forgiveness for his actions. But Stephen, who is watching this, does not think that Rakrak should apologize for his actions. After all, if Rakrak had acted differently, he would not have become a priest of his god. Stephen notes that things have been going well since the chieftain reached the heights of his allies. But for a moment, Stephen was silent as he looked at one of his screens. During this time, Stephen managed to notice that Rakrak's special skills had finally shown themselves. Looking at Rakrak, who was handing one of the skulls to Yahello, Stephen notes that the chief lives up to all his expectations. Watching Rakrak, Stephen admits that the lizard has made a new beginning. For several days now, a large group of lizards had been walking through the hot and empty desert. Suddenly, Manhwa howls from the heat and shows his teeth. After this, he falls to the ground, exhausted, and attracts the attention of the leader. Rakrak approaches the drake and, placing his hand on his paw, says that it is too early to fall. After this, turning to the Wanderer, Rakrak asks if they have time to rest, and the Wanderer replies that since the drake has fallen, they have no other choice. Hearing this, Rakrak raises his head and orders everyone to stop. After this, the other lizard warriors begin to inform everyone that there is now a halt. Rising, Rakrak wonders if they will find what they are looking for, and if he will become stronger if he rests. But now, Rakrak is better off resting and refreshing himself, because he has not eaten anything. Turning again to the Wanderer, the chief asks if they have been walking at this pace for 3 days already, and the lizard confirms this. Having heard the confirmation, Rakrak says this time out loud and thinks. Turning slightly towards the group, he says that everyone is very tired and there is almost no food left. Looking far ahead, he says that now one can only hope for a miracle from God. But suddenly a lizard runs up to Rakrak and says that another tribe has appeared. The worried lizard quickly reports that the tribe is rushing headlong in their direction. A tribe of orcs moved very noisily across the desert. One of them, most likely the leader, was very happy about something and laughed very loudly. Holding a hammer in his hand, he informs his brothers that now nothing stands in their way. They were rapidly approaching the Rakrak tribe and shouting that there was nothing worse than that monster. But suddenly the orcs stop and look forward with a very surprised look. Smiling at his new acquaintances, Rockrak tells them that they are truly reckless, and that behind him stands a bunch of lizards with weapons in their hands. Turning again to the surprised orcs, the lizard suggests that they may simply be fools. The orcs look at the group in front of them for a moment and don't dare to answer. Suddenly, they begin to look around the group more closely and notice menacing lizards with skulls on their faces and large spears in their hands. After this, the orc leader quickly turns his gaze to his modest weapon in his hands, and then he throws down the hammer, not wanting to get into trouble. And after that, he immediately falls to his knees before Rockrak and bows his head, asking for forgiveness. Later, the orcs began to explain that it was just a misunderstanding, and they wanted to leave the canyon. Handing over the enemy's modest weapon to Jaol, Rockrak asks again, and behind him stands Manun, who growls and greatly frightens the orc. Looking at the vegetables, the orc begins to explain that they ran away from home, but thinking about their relatives, they wanted to eat. Then Rockrak calmly asks why they ran away from home and what happened in the wasteland. After this, the orc points to some hill without looking. The orc continues that they used to live there, and although those lands could not be called fertile, they had enough of them. Lowering his head, the orc continues, which was enough until the moment when the monster appeared. Surprised by this, Rockrak immediately asked them again. Stephen, who was watching the situation as always, also thought about the orc's words. Having finally found the monster in question, his gaze takes on an even colder hue. The monster that settled in the canyon resembled a centipede, but even more disgusting and very large in size. In some parts of her body, there was something like a piece of ancient architecture, and near her head, there was something that resembled a pillar. The description of the lost world states that these creatures were created by the lost gods of the past. But even after the disappearance of its owners, such abomination remained on Earth. The orc led Rockrak to the centipede and pointed his finger straight at it. Seeing the monster, Rockrak, as well as Jaol, who was standing behind him, were very surprised. The centipede was peacefully dozing in the canyon, curled up into a ball. Seeing that the centipede has poisonous fangs, Stephen decides that it is too strong an enemy for now. Rockrak and his friends stood and looked at the monster that was blocking their path. Suddenly, the other lizards felt the earth shake and were very frightened by it. But calmly looking at them, the orc calmly replied that the centipede had simply growled. Rockrak decides to ask the wanderer how long it will take to go around and receives the following answer. About 8 days. Rockrak, frowning slightly, repeats this number. Stephen immediately notices how Rockrak hesitates, but he can understand it. Now his fellow tribesmen are scared and he doesn't know what to do. Considering the enemy's strength, going around would be a wise decision. But Stephen was very interested to know what decision Rockrak himself would make. But there was also a very large slope in this area. Jaal notices him and begins to carefully examine the terrain. And looking up even higher, the lizard notices that at the very top there were very large stones. Wanting to report his discovery, he immediately calls out to the leader. When Rockrak turns his attention to him, Jaal firmly states that they must fight. Jaal, who had high intelligence and intuition, was now confident that their tribe had an advantage. Hearing this, Rockrak begins to look at his friend in surprise, and the orc asks again with doubt. Sitting on the ground, Jaal asks if Rockrak remembers how the craftsman sped up the smelting of metal, and the chief replies that he used a special tool. Jaal remembers a technique the blacksmith called air bellows, which requires less effort than anything they knew. Rockrak brings his paw to his muzzle and thinks deeply about his friend's statement. Rockrak understands what his friend is getting at. If they use a special tool, they can achieve success with less effort. But when Rockrak adds that the craftsman experimented for a long time for the sake of his instrument, Jaol counters that they don't need anything special. According to Jaol, even the simplest tool could have done the job. Suddenly, one of the huge boulders above began to move. It turns out that he was being pushed from behind with a homemade lever made from 2 logs. Holding onto a log, Jaol orders everyone to hold their breath. And on command, they push the stone even harder, but so far the boulder has not yielded to them. Then Jaol gives the command on what count and what the others should do. 2 small squads continued to try to move the stones and throw them onto the monster. Stephen, watching the proceedings, notes that although their idea is simple, it is quite good. However, in order to deal with such a strong enemy, you will have to throw down all the stones at once. But will this be possible given the weight of the stones and the strength of the lizards? Too much time passes and Jaal urges the others to push faster. The rest at this moment only clutch the log tighter. On command, they push the log forward and finally manage to move the stone. Seeing the stone fall, Yor starts to rejoice loudly, and Jaal is surprised that his plan worked. One after another, the stones begin to fall rapidly down on the unsuspecting monster. Suddenly, the centipede hears some noise and rises. But the stone is already too close, and she won't have time to avoid the blow. Noticing the danger too late, she takes the blow with her head. In order to assess the result of his efforts, Yor approaches the cliff and bends down. But Stephen realizes that the tribe has failed to accomplish its task. Having received a blow to the head with a stone, the centipede only begins to scream loudly. Rockrak looks down at the enemy and is horrified that the enemy was not even slightly affected by their attack. The scale of the centipede where the blow fell broke, but the monster suffered no other damage. The lizards above notice with horror that the monster is rising. Then everyone starts rushing around trying to throw off the remaining stones. But Steven notices that it is too late for such an attack and rises from his seat. Rakrak again notices changes in his body, just like in the battle with Manun. One of the lizards notices that the log is suddenly slipping out of his hands. Rakrak felt a surge of strength again and was able to cope with the task at hand alone. Rakrak's strength had again increased so much that he was able to single-handedly throw a huge boulder into the air, greatly surprising the lizard standing nearby. After this, Yahello immediately points his hand to the third boulder while giving a command to Rakrak. The lizard immediately runs up to the indicated boulder, crouching slightly, and grabs it with both paws. From trying to lift such a large weight, our hero's muscles become very tense, and veins begin to appear on his forehead and paws. Finally, Rakrak manages to get the stone moving and pushes it forward. Now 2 huge boulders were flying down at once onto the centipede, which had almost reached the top where the defenseless lizards were. Getting closer and closer to its enemies, the centipede opens its huge mouth and begins to roar loudly. But at that moment, Rakrak, who had been under the influence of God's power until now, resolutely grabbed the spear. The lizard accelerates and jumps from the top at high speed, causing Yahello to be very surprised. While in the air, the lizard begins to aim at the target and raises the spear back, preparing to launch it. Finally taking aim, Rakrak launches his spear, which flies towards its target at great speed. After a few moments, the spear almost reaches the centipede, cutting 2 huge boulders into 2 parts. The spear hits a strange structure that was on the monster's back and breaks it, then pierces the centipede's back. Having received such a strong blow, the centipede begins to scream even louder due to the pain it is experiencing. But before the monster has time to come to his senses, a huge boulder, which he did not notice, is already hanging over him. Not having time to escape the blow, the centipede takes the boulder with its head. From such a strong blow, the centipede's whiskers and horns begin to fall off, and hemolymph flows out of the injuries and head, and at the same time, stones continue to fall from above. Receiving blow after blow, the centipede does not have time to recover, and again falls under the blow of a stone, which this time crushes it even more. Yahello watched their leader's actions from above, her mouth hanging open in surprise. Rakrak reaches the ground before his enemy and lands deftly on his paws. Still sitting in his place, Rakrak watches the centipede fall, no longer showing any signs of life. At the same time, Steven crosses his legs and rejoices that his tribe's hunt was successful. The defeated centipede lay on its back on the ground, its limbs pressed to its body, and the Rakrak tribe gradually descended to examine the fallen monster. Realizing that they have won, the remaining lizards above begin to loudly rejoice in their victory and raise their spears into the sky. Steven, watching them, was glad that faith in him had grown. But what worried him more was the new item that the system gave him as a reward for defeating the monster. Steven wanted to kill the monster precisely for the sake of this item in his hands, the essence of abomination. Special resources can be obtained through faith, but special items are used to create a completely new thing. With this essence, Steven will be able to summon an entity that will spread the word of God with its existence. Moreover, this entity can evolve, and if it is developed enough, it can obtain a special class like an avatar. Raising his hand to his face, Steven wonders if this is the same entity creation as in the game. If this is the case, then Steven needs to decide what kind of entity he will create. Yahello and several other lizards approach the body of the dead centipede. Tearing off one of the centipede's legs, Yahello asks if it can be eaten, while the other 2 lizards watch her actions with doubt. Bringing his paw to his muzzle, Yahello grabs it with his teeth and tries to bite it off. "I tried the meat." She spits it out and gives her verdict. Although it stinks, the meat is edible and doesn't taste so bad. But another lizard comes up and, tearing off a piece of meat, says that it will be difficult to eat it in this form. Thinking about this, Yahello brings his paw to his muzzle and suggests diluting the taste with something, since raw meat is not suitable. Looking up at the vines nearby, she suggests adding an edible portion of the woody vine and cooking the meat over a fire to help mask the smell. Finally, the meat was cooked with the vines, and wanting to taste it, Rakrak grabbed the meat with 2 fingers. Having tried the meat, the chief is very surprised by its taste. Continuing to chew, he replies that the meat has become soft and tasty, and Yahello explains that she was trying to cook it. When Rakrak asks her about it again, she explains that she simply tried adding some edible greens and fried it. Then, satisfied with the result, Rakrak says that he was going to throw away all the meat because of its smell, and asks Yahello to teach him how to cook too, because it is a useful skill. Yahello agrees to teach him later, and while Rakrak is about to deal with the remaining meat, he is about to tell him something. Looking at Rakrak, she says that she recently noticed that the leader of the orc tribe has his own heir. As he brought the meat to his mouth, Yahello continued to say that Rakrak would soon need an heir as well. Hearing this, the lizard does not have time to bring the meat to his mouth, and dropping it from his hands, he opens his eyes wide and looks at his interlocutor. Yahello calmly continues to say that he will grow old someday, and an heir is necessary for the stability of the tribe. Rockrak brings his hand to his face and thinks seriously about these words, asking again if she thinks he needs a partner. Looking up at the chieftain, Yahello says that if he doesn't see anyone else in that role yet, then how about her? But Rockrak continues to sit in his pose with his eyes closed and does not answer her yet. Finally, he thought it all over and, raising his head, began to tell her something. But his attention was drawn to an unknown shiny object that was behind his interlocutor. Rockrak immediately tells his interlocutor that behind her, among the ruins that were previously on the back of the centipede, something is shining. It was a golden object, something like a tablet, on which were depicted people going about their business, and below was text in an ancient language. The object immediately attracts some of the lizards, and they begin to examine it, and Rockrak assumes that it was on the back of the centipede. Without thinking twice, Ur grabs the unknown object and tries to push it into his mouth, but says that he cannot eat it, and then the wanderer replies that the object is made of gold. Hearing this, Yahello calmly replies that she saw it earlier when the craftsman showed her different types of metals. She goes on to say that if you clean it, it will shine and reflect light, and it is said to not change color or rot, which is why it is valued more than other metals. But this angers Ura, and he asks what difference it makes how valuable it is if it is soft but heavy, and moreover not fit for food, to which the wanderer jokingly suggests that he hunt deer. After this, giving the gold to the chief, the big guy rejoices and says that deer meat is sweet and very tasty, and the orcs recently told him where he can hunt them. Rockrak silently accepts the piece of gold on which there are marks from Ura's teeth, and begins to examine it. Ura turns to the chieftain and asks if he will go with them, but Rockrak politely refuses and suggests that they go alone. Looking at the gold even closer and more carefully, Rockrak thinks about the words that this metal does not rot. On the stone lay the carcass of a deer, from which blood flowed and colored the stone red. Continuing to hold the tablet in his hand, Rockrak thought that everything in the world dies and disappears, and nothing remains unchanged. But this tablet will not rot. Rockrak wonders if someone was trying to save something on it, but what exactly was being saved? The chief's thoughts are interrupted by the appearance of Yahello, who reports that the tribe is ready for sleep. Turning to Yahello, Rockrak continues to say that he never told anyone where he was going, but it's good that Yahello always knows how to find him. Suddenly she says that the only lizard she can remember who wore a fur cape was Rockrak, and surprises him with this. Rockrak lowers the sign and looks at Yahello with a surprised look and says that it was she who told him to wear the cape, and she explains that since he is the chief, she wanted to make him special. With a slight smile on her face, she replies that the tribal leader should have some kind of symbol. Looking down at his fur cape and running his fingers through the fur, Rockrak thinks about the symbol. Much time passed and night came when the deer carcass finally began to rot and attract insects. Continuing to sit in front of the carcass and holding the tablet in his hand, Rockrak comes to the conclusion that life goes hand in hand with death, and therefore the tablet will one day evaporate. But suddenly something nearby distracts Rockrak from his thoughts, and he looks up ahead. Suddenly he saw how the flies that were circling above the carcass began to draw several signs in the air. Surprised, Rockrak looked on, not looking away, and could not understand whether this was an illusion or reality. Grabbing the first stick he comes across on the ground, Rockrak simultaneously thinks that the symbol that does not rot is gold. After this, leaning on one knee, the lizard begins to move the stick along the ground. Rockrak was alone, and for a long time he continued to diligently move his stick, drawing something below. Finally, morning came, and the morning rays shone on the face of the still sleeping Yahello. But she immediately opens her eyes when she hears someone calling her from behind. As she gets up, she turns around to see Rockrak peering into her tent, causing Yahello to ask if something is wrong. But Rockrak calmly explains to her that he wants to show her something. He brings Yahello to the place where he spent the whole night, and now the two of them lean over the ground and look at it. Drawing a sign with a stick that looks like a triangle and two sticks, Rockrak says that this is it. Yahello points to the sign and asks if it means his name, but Rockrak explains that the sign means male lizard. But Yahello doesn't understand and asks him to explain. Then Rockrak draws something on the ground again and says that it is Yahello. The next sign Rockrak drew was similar to the previous one, but this one had an inverted triangle. Looking at the sign, Yahello asks if it means the lizard woman, and looking at her, Rockrak answers yes. And then he draws two more sticks between the symbols, resembling an equal sign. Yahello starts looking at the new sign thoughtfully, trying to understand what it means. But she fails to understand Rockrak's intention, and raising her head to him, she directly asks about the meaning of the symbols. Then Rockrak also looked up at her and for some time did not answer, looking into the eyes of his interlocutor. Rockrak explains that this means that they become partners. Leaning a little closer to his interlocutor's face, he replies that this is the answer to her proposal. But after this, Yahello immediately snatches the wand from Rockrak's hand, and with a slight movement she draws a circle on the ground, inside which were the previous signs. After drawing this, she asks Rockrak if he knows what it means. Rockrak only silently looks up at his interlocutor and smiles slightly. Taking his partner's hand and intertwining the ends with his tail, Rockrak answers her question affirmatively. A smile appears on Steven's face, hidden behind his mask after hearing the news that the Rockrak tribe has invented writing. Steven knows it will take several generations to create a stable writing system, but he is glad that it happened so early in the game. The boy watched Rockrak, who was hiding in the bushes with a spear, and looked somewhere ahead. Now Rockrak was hunting and noticed a small group of deer. Having waited for the right moment, Rockrak rushes at the largest deer. The other lizards watched Rockrak and rejoiced at his large catch. To the uninitiated, it's just a hunt, but competing to catch the biggest game for your partner is the lizard-like creature's way of celebrating their wedding. With the deer carcass on his shoulder, Rockrak accepted congratulations from the other lizards. But suddenly something distracts him and surprises him so much that he freezes in place. Yahello set a trap, which also caught a similarly large deer. Rockrak looked at his partner in surprise and didn't know what to say, and Steven, who was also watching this, just grinned. Talking to the orcs, Rockrak replies that sooner or later they would have had to face this monster anyway. Rockrak continues to tell the surprised orc that since their people have owned this land for a long time, they can continue to live here. The words spoken touched the orc very much, causing tears to appear in his eyes. Bowing before Rockrak, the orc begins to thank the chieftain with all his heart. Standing up straight, the orc immediately introduces his son to the leader, who will become the leader of the orcs in the future. The orc continues to say that they are more familiar with this area, and his son could lead the travelers further. He goes on to say that they used to live in the forests until they were driven out by other huge beasts and tribes. But now, thanks to Rockrak, they were able to return to their normal way of life. Hearing that the orcs will never forget his kindness, the chieftain nods his head slightly to them. While Rockrak sat and peered into the depths of the forest, someone suddenly called out to him. Someone from his tribe found footprints on the ground that they could not identify. Rockrak walked up to the tracks on the ground and, sitting down, began to examine them. He, too, failed to identify the tracks, so he turns to the Wanderer and asks if he knows who these tracks belong to. The Wanderer then suggests that they may belong to frogs that walk on two legs. But Rockrak does not hide his surprise when he learns about the existence of such creatures. The Wanderer goes on to explain that among them there are both peaceful and warlike species who are able to think and speak just like the lizards. And the Wanderer dares to assume that if they went out on reconnaissance, it means they are fighting with someone. And from the tracks, it can be seen that 5 representatives of the species passed here, which suggests that there are many more frogs than the Rockrak tribe. Hearing this, Rockrak immediately rises and orders everyone to return to the temporary camp. Rockrak returned to his camp, where there were many tents as well as pillars with torches that illuminated the area well. Frowning, Rockrak tells everyone to pitch their tents much further apart in order to take up more space. But one of the lizards turns to Yahello and asks why they would do this, and receives the answer that most likely the other tribes are larger than their tribe. Yahello advises that more scouts need to be sent, and Rockrak agrees, but asks that they ensure that everyone has an equal share of the work. After this, Yahello immediately announces that the other tribes will be watching them. And she is not mistaken, because 2 silhouettes have already noticed the lights in the night and watched from afar. A few days later, the Rockrak tribe changed locations, and fortunately, the encounter with the frogs never happened. During this time, the tribe's security had been greatly strengthened, leaving Steven doubtful that other players had made the same progress. The tribe's cattle breeding also progressed well. The tribe was also able to adapt their houses to the new environment. Steven was amazed at how quickly they were able to spread literacy within the tribe. The symbols on the stone were visible to all the lizards, and the markings on the simple map indicated the hunting grounds. Rockrak also began to record the amount of harvest collected by each lizard. Some of the lizards were happy that they had collected more than the others, while others considered their efforts insufficient and wanted to work harder. Rockrak's actions increased the tribe's productivity, which pleased Steven. Steven noticed that locust swarms were growing in the center of the continent, and the number of insects had also increased in the north. The insect race had reached level 4, and if there were other players around, Steven wouldn't have been able to even dream of such a thing. But the guy thinks that if he was called from the eastern lands, perhaps he should take another advantage from the current circumstances. Observing Rockrak, he concludes that both Rockrak's abilities and the tribe's development have reached average levels. But getting up from his seat, the guy thinks that this is only the beginning, and further on they will face dangers that they have never encountered before. Now everyone in the tribe was busy with their own affairs, and Yahello was also discussing something with Yura. But suddenly Rockrak, who was standing next to them, was distracted by another lizard, who was just running up to them. The lizard announces that they have a problem, causing everyone to have worried looks on their faces. Hearing that the frogs are coming towards them, Rockrak's face shows surprise and concern, causing him to frown slightly. Several frogs emerged from the forest, one of which had a feather decoration on its chest. Rockrak, in turn, went out to meet the frogs with Yura and Yahello. Finally seeing what the humanoid frogs are, Rockrak begins to look closely at them and something really catches his eye. Unexpectedly for himself, he notices one lizard among all the frogs. After this, Rockrak immediately wonders what the lizard is doing among the frogs and assumes that the frogs want to negotiate. The frogs had their daggers hidden in their sheaths, and the lizards standing in front were already beginning to point their weapons at the uninvited guests. The representative of the frog tribe is the first to speak and introduces himself as Shunen, son of the great chief Alroy. After this, he immediately adds that they do not want to attack humanoid lizards. Deciding that Shunen is being polite in his own way, Rockrak raises his hand in a friendly gesture. After this, Rockrak immediately introduces himself and also speaks of his unwillingness to fight the frogs, but he is determined to find out why the frogs have honored them with their visit. Shunen quickly glances at the frog standing next to him, and the frog gives Shunen an affirmative nod. After this, Shunen immediately begins to say that they came to report that the Rockrak tribe has settled in their territory. But raising his paw slightly and running his gaze over the area, Rockrak replies that he does not think that all the land belongs to the frogs, and when they first arrived, they did not see any signs indicating the boundaries. After that, he nods slightly that, frankly speaking, they didn't even try to look for them. Rockrak wanted to apologize for the misunderstanding that had arisen, and this greatly surprised the frogs. But asking for understanding, Rockrak says that in their homeland there were no such rules, and until they find a more suitable place, he asks for permission to stay here. This request greatly confuses Shunen, and he is at a loss, but Rockrak reminds him of his status as the son of the chieftain. Rockrak considered him the most worthy here, and thought that he could turn to Shunen with such a request, and hopes that he was not mistaken. Overcoming his excitement, Shunen replies that Rockrak is right, and with Shunen's future authority, such a request is feasible. But the two thugs who were behind Shunen silently listened to their conversation and did not look pleased. Looking at the uninvited guests, Rockrak understands that his guess was correct. The leader sent them here so that they could take a closer look at the lizards. Afterwards, he immediately looks away from me and frowns a little. Rockrak looks at the same lizard among the frogs, and he has many questions for them, but he should be careful. Suddenly, Rockrak turns to Shunen and says that this is not the best place for conversation, and they would be better off going to the lizard village, where the frogs can be received with all hospitality. The chief goes on to say that since their tribes agreed to peace without any strife, it is worth noting. After listening to what was whispered to Shunen, he replies that this is not the best idea. He thanks for the invitation, but he can't accept it because their tribes don't know each other well enough. But Rockrak continues to insist on his own and says that he can't just let go of someone their tribe is indebted to. Then he suggests celebrating right here, and after exchanging glances with his frogs, Shunen hesitantly replies that it is possible. While the meat was roasting on the fire, the two chieftains sat and talked about something. Now Rockrak decides to understand what kind of relationship that lizard has with the frogs and why they came here at all. But looking at Shunen, Rockrak understands that he cannot let them understand what the lizard is really thinking. Then Rockrak asks the most ordinary question: what are those feathers around Shunen's neck? Taking one feather with its paw, the frog replies that it is a cockatrice feather. Surprised, Rockrak asks again about this animal. Shunen says that Rockrak is lucky if he is not already familiar with these birds that live in this forest, walk on two legs, and are very dangerous. Cockatrices are not only very large, but also poisonous and difficult to catch, and they are also very agile. And it is because of these birds that the frogs have to keep an eye on this area, and Rockrak asks if they attack the bird with spears from afar, if it is difficult to get to them. Hearing about the spears, Shunen chuckles a little and asks what they are. But Rockrak looked at him in surprise, embarrassed by this situation, and did not answer. Then Shunen offers to show their weapons and asks to bring him a bow and arrows, and Rockrak does not voice the question of what a bow and arrow are. Suddenly, Shunen calls out to the lizard Owen and asks him to bring him a bow and arrows. Rockrak's attention was immediately drawn to this request, and now he watched with interest in his eyes. Shunen accepts the brought weapon and wants to ask Owen for another favor. Pointing at a nearby tree, Shunen asks for a target to be hung there so he can practice shooting. Rockrak continued to watch silently as Owen carried out the frog's requests. The first arrow was fired and hit the center of the target. Arms folded across his chest, Rockrak marvels at Shunen's precision. Shunen explains that they have been learning to shoot since they were children, and that he is one of the best archers in the village, which impresses Rockrak, and he asks to try the bow as well. Shunen immediately agrees and hands over his bow to the lizard. While Rockrak was trying to pick up the bow and pull the string, Shunen said that it might not work the first time. He finally manages to pull the bowstring and aim the arrow at the target, after which he notes the strength of the stick and thread. He notes that the damage and area of effect is less than that of a spear, but he can carry more arrows and then releases his first arrow. The arrow doesn't even reach the target and ends up stuck in the ground. Rockrak fires his next arrow and admits to himself that he would like to study this skill further. There were now many arrows around the target, but none of them reached it. Shunen reassures the chief that nothing will be perfect the first time and asks Owen to bring arrows. Looking at the departing lizard, Shunen sighs in displeasure. Rockrak gets up and says that he was the one who shot and should have collected the arrows himself, but Shunen is surprised by such words and asks to take this as his gesture of goodwill. As Rockrak began to walk away from Shunen, the frog looked at the other lizards with interest. Ignoring the frog's recent words, Rockrak approaches Owen. Now he bends down and also begins to collect arrows, asking again for the lizard's name, and he awkwardly confirms. Rockrak immediately notices the panic of his interlocutor, which he considers strange, and asks how the lizard ended up among the frogs. Owen continues collecting arrows and awkwardly explains that lizards and frogs live together. Rockrak turns to him and asks him directly why they live together. Owen turns to the chief and says that the two races can help each other. But upon hearing this, Rockrak's eyes widen and he asks again what kind of help he is talking about. But smiling, Owen says that this can happen, so they should continue to live in harmony. Then Rockrak asks again how two races can help each other. Rockrak listens silently to the fact that in exchange for protection, the lizards could help the frogs. Frogs can't leave the water for long, and lizards are good at collecting fruit and climbing trees, so sharing food with them in exchange for protection is a good idea. Rockrak turns his head away from his interlocutor and says that they are strong and do not need anyone's protection, and Owen objects that the forest is a very dangerous place and the tribe of frogs is the largest. Smiling, Owen admits that without them he wouldn't have been able to live to this moment. After listening to his interlocutor, Rockrak looked at him with a look full of incomprehension, and a second later his face completely changes. And gloomy, he replies that Owen should forget his words and pretend that Rockrak was asking about how to shoot a bow better. Shunen finally waited for the meat and stuffed the first piece into his mouth. Suddenly he exclaims that he was used to the taste of venison, but the addition of greens made the meat even tastier, and Rockrak, chewing his piece, is glad that Shunen is pleased. Then Rockrak asks if they have tried buffalo meat, and Shunen says that they haven't hunted them for a long time, but according to his memories, the meat was very tasty. When Rockrak reveals that they keep buffalo, Shunen's eyes widen and his mouth drops open. The lizard continues to say that they could trade one of these for several bows, and Shunen immediately wants to agree. But then one of his companions looms over him and the frog again begins to fidget and refuse. Looking at his interlocutor, Rockrak replies that it is very sad, but he himself does not seem surprised. Trying to smooth things over, Shunen says that they can discuss it when they get to know each other better. Pointing his hand to the side, Shunen reports that their tribes have gotten along with each other. Not only Owen was able to join the lizard tribe, but the frogs too, which is not surprising because two races live in the frog tribe. Suddenly, Shunen calls out to Owen, causing him to stop talking in the company. Shunen asks to tell about how their tribes have helped each other in recent months. Owen immediately rises from his seat and replies that he is glad to tell of the friendship of their peoples. Watching from the side, Rockrak finds confirmation of his assumption. This topic was approached smoothly, as if they had discussed it beforehand. And if he hadn't talked to Owen before, he might have fallen for this trick. Saying goodbye to his new acquaintances, Rockrak suggests that they come to them themselves next time, and Shunen agrees, but after listening to what they told him, he immediately refuses. When the frogs leave, Shunen raises one hand and waves to the lizards. Rockrak smiles slightly and repeats the gesture, and Yahello does the same. The lizards continue to watch and see Shunen lightly hit a frightened Owen on the shoulder. And after this, the lizard immediately turns his gaze, full of fear, back. Rockrak immediately asks his partner if she saw it, and Yahello answers positively. As Shunen looms over Owen, our heroes come to the conclusion that this does not look like a relationship between equal species. When the frog tribe returned, Owen was getting punched in the face. Shunen starts yelling at the fallen Owen, saying that he saw everything. The frog presses on the frightened lizard and asks what he said to the tribal leader. Then Owen bows down to the frogs and replies that he didn't say anything, and Rockrak only asked how to shoot a bow correctly, and Owen gave him a couple of tips. Then the frog that was nearby kicks the lizard in the side and says that he himself does not know how to shoot a bow. Clutching his bruised area, Owen replies that it is true, but he said he could in order to divert suspicion. After thinking about the lizard's words, Shunen replies that he did the right thing. Raising his head up, Owen continues to say that he pretended then that he couldn't tell him everything, and in order to learn how to shoot a bow, Rockrak should give something to the frogs in return. Leaning slightly over the lizard, Shunen asks what Rockrak said, and Owen replies that the chieftain gave up on the idea and said he had nothing to offer in return. After this, Shunen exchanges a glance with his partner. Owen bows his head and hears that nothing less was expected of him. Shunen continues to say something to the lizard, and the lizard addresses the frog as its master. Looking up and far ahead, Shunen asks if Owen remembers being on that island. Turning its head back, the lizard nods affirmatively. Behind them was a small island with two tents with someone sitting inside and two guards outside. With a nasty smile, Shunen continues to say that Owen is very lucky. The frog explains that he has long wanted to offer the little lizards as a sacrifice. But the new victims found them themselves, and there is no need for cubs yet. Shunen continues to pressure the lizard, and under pressure, he agrees to everything. Looking back at the island, the lizard says that he is very lucky. And after that, Owen decisively says that he will try to outsmart the lizard tribe. As night fell, Owen chided himself for not having known how things would turn out, and for not having tried to get here. The lizard sat on the riverbank and thought that he should have guessed everything when they were so warmly received. Or when they were dragged to the Brotherhood ceremony, or at least when they were asked to come to this island. After all, the remaining 200 lizards were not capable of fighting back against 1,500 frogs. Plus, there was a huge monster looming over them. Everyone was horrified when they saw such a colossus in front of them. Moreover, this monster had 2 heads, which according to Owen was their god, and the 2 heads of the monster were absolutely identical, and both had huge teeth, and the monster resembled a reptile. The lizards were locked in and could not escape because of a huge fence. This monster could crush the lizards with its weight, spraying the blood of the dead everywhere and staining the survivors with it. The 2-headed monster commanded the frogs just as the frogs commanded the lizards. And in Owen's opinion, this will not change and cannot be avoided. Owen remembers Rock, who looked like a strong warrior and had 600 lizards in his tribe. But according to Owen, they were just savages who didn't even know about the existence of bows and arrows. If they can sacrifice Rock's tribe, they will be able to live longer, and Owen will be able to return to his son. At the next meeting, the Rock tribe brought one of their buffalo. Shunen was delighted with the live buffalo and simply beamed with happiness. Pleased with himself, Rock smiles and reminds that he said that they have buffaloes and again offers the frogs in exchange. Shunen ponders this when Owen interjects and suggests that they should get to know each other better before exchanging resources. Turning to the lizard, Shunen agrees, and Owen continues to say that they don't know anything about the lizard tribe yet, and suggests that Rock come to them. After this, Owen smiles and says that then the frogs will be able to give them onions, and this is a good opportunity to get to know each other better. Rock fired an arrow from his bow, which simply stuck into the ground. He turns to Yahello and asks how it went this time, but she replies that the arrow only flew half its maximum distance. Looking down at his bow, Rock decides that this is the limit of their replica bow, which they were able to replicate perfectly, but not the string. Interrupting his thoughts, Yahello informs him that the 5th meeting of their tribes is about to begin, and she assumes that they want to learn as much as possible about them. Rock agrees and adds that the frogs are clearly hiding something under their trust, and may be up to some dirty trick. The problem with their tribe is that they still don't know the plans of their enemies, so they need to stay on guard. Turning to his interlocutor, the lizard says that it is time for him to achieve something at this meeting and asks if all the necessary herbs have been collected, to which he receives a positive answer. And then he thinks that it would be good if Owen became the solution to their problems. At that moment, he hears Yahello start to answer him something, and this makes him turn his gaze to her. She says they could try giving that guy a chance. At this, Rock turns to her doubtfully and thinks about her words. Owen tried to fight the hand that was clinging to his neck and said that he did exactly as he was told, but it did not help. Shunen asks his partner to leave the lizard alone, fearing that it might die from such a grip. But Oh Boy reassures him that the lizard will not die from such a grip. Meanwhile, Owen continues to say that the black-scale lizards were more cautious than he had expected. Then Oh Boy grabs the lizard by the snout and gloats that they are not as foolish as Owen's tribe, who jumped into the trap without a second thought. When Oh Boy gets tired of playing with the lizard, he pushes it away and it flies to the ground. Owen falls to his knees and clutches his throat, gasping for air as Oh Boy says goodbye to Shunen. Lost in thought, Shunen puts his paw to his muzzle and says that they should hurry. Frog continues to say that his father asked him to arrange the sacrifice ceremony as soon as possible, which greatly surprises Owen. Shunen orders Owen to get as much information as possible and bring the black-scale tribe here as soon as possible, but the lizard does not understand what the rush is for. The frog replies that the illness of his father and the elders is only getting worse, so they cannot postpone the ceremony any longer. Owen carefully asks if they are sick, it means they are infected with scabies. But the lizard did not understand how dangerous this disease was. Scratching his head, Shunen says that the lizard shouldn't know about this, but overall it's not that big of a deal. Finally, Shunen makes up his mind and admits that scabies is a dangerous disease. And if you catch this infection, you will not only itch, but your body will also be covered in white, sticky mucus. The frog says that it is impossible to wash it off, and over time it will cover the entire body. When there is too much of it, breathing problems will begin, and then death, which befell their priest yesterday. Owen learns for the first time that scabies can be fatal and doesn't understand why Shunen is telling the lizard this. After thinking for a while, Owen begins to guess that this is a test, and he shouldn't be happy or surprised. Placing his hand to his chin, Owen replies that the lizards must not know about this. After all, there will be those among the lizards who will mock the frogs for this, and Shunen agrees with him, but admits that they will not be able to hide it forever. Then Owen replies that it is possible to change the lizard's reaction, to tell them that they can get it too. Shunen admits the idea is good, but notes that the mange does not spread to lizards. Owen replies that there is a herb in the forest that produces a white sap when broken and can cause itching. Because Owen comes into frequent contact with frogs, he is willing to tell the other lizards that he has contracted frog mange. Shunen comes closer to the lizard, and putting his hand on his shoulder admits it's a good idea, and says that he didn't doubt the cunning Owen. And after that, the frog begins to whisper that if Owen manages to bring the Blackscale tribe here, then he and his family will be freed from their fate forever. Hearing this, Owen immediately becomes happy and begins to thank his smiling owner. Continuing along the river, Shunen mentions that they will need more sacrifices this time, so Owen should try to bring them all here. But Owen interrupts his master and wants to ask him for a request, which the lizard thinks might be a little difficult. Scratching the back of his head, Owen awkwardly says that he thinks that in order to successfully negotiate, they should still give a few bows to the Blackscale tribe. Shunen seems to be unhappy with these words as the corners of his mouth begin to pull down, creating a displeased grimace. A new day dawned, on which the fifth meeting of the two tribes took place. Suddenly, Yer grabs some flat object and, knocking on it, tells one of the frogs that the object is very strong, but the frog is surprised by such material. At the same time, Rock was talking to Shunen and pointing to bags of grass that could be used to treat scabies. He asks directly if this is not enough to exchange for a bow, and Owen notes that the lizards have collected all the medicinal herbs in the area. After thinking about it, Shunen replies that it is not a matter of quantity at all. Frog believes that exchanging weapons requires a certain amount of trust between the tribes, which they don't have yet. Leaning his head on his hand, Rock looks down and says under his breath that the conversations are always about trust. But suddenly an unexpected thought comes to him, which makes him raise his stern gaze forward. In order to strengthen the trust between their tribes, Rock asks Shunen to fulfill one of his requests. Gesturing towards Owen, Rock says that he would like to speak with the lizard one-on-one. Hearing this, some of the frogs turn to look at Owen, and a satisfied smile appears on Shunen's face. Shunen agrees almost immediately, and Owen also looks like he's only too happy to talk to the chief. The two lizards headed deeper into the forest where no one would disturb them. At this time, Owen explains that their gray-brown lizards went through a brotherhood ceremony before becoming part of the tribe. Owen went on to say that before this, they had become more closely acquainted with the frogs. After this, Owen smiles and asks Rock to tell about himself, and then Owen too will be as open as possible to the lizards. With his arms outstretched, Owen continues to say that Rock must agree that they should put aside their mistrust and take a step towards each other, but at that moment, Rock's attention is distracted by a blue butterfly. The butterfly flies up to Owen and lands on his head, surprising the lizard. Owen finds the butterfly strange and brushes it away, but Rock immediately understands the sign from his god. This brings a slight smile to his face. After this, Rock agrees that there is mistrust between them that needs to be ended. Pointing his hand at the blue butterfly, Rock wants to tell the lizard everything about his tribe. Shunen, Owen, and Oh Boy were in the same place as always, but unlike previous encounters, this time the lizard was not beaten, but praised for the work he had done. Shunen, full of delight, asks if the lizards really agreed to come here, and Owen gives a positive answer. Oh Boy inserts his phrase about how he thought it was a trap when the lizards called them to their village, but they really turned out to be fools. Now the frogs know the location of their settlement and even the lizards' knowledge of healing. The scouts reported that there were approximately 600 individuals in their settlement, but in reality, there were only 300 lizards and 30 warriors. Shunen continued to say that he didn't expect the lizards to trust them so easily, but Owen played his part in this. Suddenly, the frog turns to Owen and asks what he would like as a reward, but Owen awkwardly says that what he was promised will be enough for him. But Shunen, having forgotten his words, asks again, and Owen replies that he promised that Owen's children would never go to sacrifices, and that he would be able to live with the children. Oh Boy is unhappy with such a promise, but Shunen asks his friend not to get angry, and says that his father will understand him. Besides, one cannot always be strict with the lizards, but show that, led by the frogs, pleasant things await them. Shunen turns to the lizard and asks him not to worry, promising that he will remember his promise. After this, Owen is left alone again and still looks at the small island nearby just as before. In his heart, the lizard is happy that now he will be able to live with the children as he wanted. He continues to reassure himself that this is enough for him and that he should not have any problems left. Not wanting to get into trouble, he says that everything else is the problem of the stupid lizard chief. Remembering Rock, Owen takes the stick in his hand and begins to draw something in the sand. Owen thinks Rock should have been more careful, remembering how he showed them their writing. When Owen asked about the marks on the ground, Rock explained that they were letters that his tribe had invented. Rock begins to teach the lizard a little of their writing and shows what some of their symbols mean. By drawing a cross, he says that it means denial. Drawing another letter next to it, which resembled a check mark, he says that this means a lie. Looking at the letters, Owen asks if it is possible to write two letters next to each other, and Rakrak says it is possible. By drawing two icons side by side, Owen says that they do not form a lie, but rather the truth. Rakrak is delighted by this and admits that he hadn't thought about it and thinks Owen is very smart, but he says that it's easy for him. As he sat next to Rakrak, he suddenly remembered Shunen calling him a sly one. But when there was a brief silence between the lizard and the chief, Owen remembers that Rakrak did not tell the frogs about his writing, but why he decided to tell Owen about it. Suddenly, Rakrak lowers his hand to the ground again and says that it's all about trust. Drawing a circle in the sand, Rakrak admits that the trust that is formed between his tribe and the frogs of Alroy does not actually bother him as much as the trust between him and Owen. These words surprise Owen very much, and for some time he looks at Rakrak without looking away. But when he comes to his senses, he turns away and says that he shouldn't say that. But Rakrak interrupts him and says that he does not believe his words about frogs, and that there is probably a completely different meaning hidden behind them. Recalling the beginning of his journey, Rakrak says that his tribe is familiar with pain and they know what it is like to be lost and afraid. Looking directly at his interlocutor, Rakrak continues to say that they are the same as him, and they know suffering firsthand. Hearing this, Owen turns away and quietly gasps, covering his face with his hand. Rakrak asks if he is mistaken, but Owen wants to change the subject and asks if the chieftain has anything else to say. But Rakrak turns away slightly and only says that he has already noticed glimmers of faith in them. Owen acknowledges Rakrak's self-confidence, but believes that he still cannot defeat the frog tribe and their faith. You can't be sure of victory if you haven't seen the monster. Moreover, they didn't even know about the bow and arrow, not to mention the secret weapon of the frog warriors. Continuing to look at the island, the lizard thinks that telling him about the letters was a stupid decision. As he gets up, he continues to think that Rakrak trusted him in vain. Owen thinks he can't be trusted, but then why did Rakrak believe in him? After all, in Owen's opinion, he was the most simple deceiver and cunning person. In the morning, the letters that Owen had left at night were trampled by frogs who were in a hurry to meet the tribe of Black Scales. Rakrak finally arrived at the village with his warriors. Shunen comes out to them and begins to greet them joyfully, and Rakrak thanks him for their hospitality. Rakrak continues to say that he hopes today's meeting will deepen the relationship between their tribes, which Shunen agrees with. Rakrak asks not to worry about their weapons, as they were simply worried about meeting a cockatrice on the way here. Shunen replies that it's nothing, but in reality he thinks they are idiots who wouldn't be able to defeat the bird with their sticks anyway. Rakrak remembers Owen and looks around, asking where he is, and Shunen replies that he is preparing for the banquet. Shunen finally manages to find Owen, who is drawing something on the ground, and assumes that he is thinking about where the lizards would be best placed. After this, the frog asks them to go to Owen and say hello to him, while Shunen himself will check the readiness of the food. Owen, who continued to draw something on the ground, suddenly hears a voice behind him calling the lizard. Turning around, he sees Rakrak in front of him, who has already arrived with the tribe and reports that he has marked their places. As Owen continues to say that when the lizards sit down in their places, the feast will begin, Rakrak looks down in surprise and a little wary. Each of the places was marked with a lie, and Owen said that the feast would be the beginning of friendship and peace between their tribes. Turning to Yor, Rakrak reaches for the skull that was on his back. Pulling his helmet onto his head, he orders everyone to begin. Yor immediately begins to carry out the order and swings his spear. He accurately hits one of the frogs with his spear, which was holding a bow, and such a sudden attack shocks the frogs. The archers who were nearby were horrified to see how the spear entered their partner's chin and peeked out from the top of his head. Rakrak firmly orders that all frogs be destroyed, after which his warriors set off into battle. The frogs were so surprised by the sudden attack that they had no time to defend themselves from the spears. The fallen frogs asked Owen before they died if he knew about it. The blood of the enemy splashed in all directions and painted the muzzle and skull of the Cancer red. Walking slowly through the village and looking at the corpses, Rakrak believed that they had killed everyone, and Yor also confirmed that they had done so. But while they were attacking the warriors, many of the frogs had escaped, and with them Shunen, so they would soon have to face the shooters. Yor says that even though everything is going according to plan, they could use some arrows right now. Then Rakrak decides to turn to Owen, who was next to the chief the whole time. Turning his head back slightly, Rakrak dryly says that he has a request for the lizard. The archers were drawing their bowstrings with arrows whose tips were smeared with something purple. Shunen stood at the head of the lizards and was outraged at how things turned out with this lizard Owen. He turns sharply to a nearby frog and asks if he has conveyed Shunen's orders, and he answers in the affirmative. The frogs decide that in order to win, all the warriors in the village must attack the lizards, and their lizards will have to remain in the village until the warriors arrive there. After this, Shunen cries out loudly, calling his warriors to him. With his hand outstretched, Shunen says that they need to attack the lizard men until reinforcements arrive, so he orders them to attack when ready. After this, a rain of arrows immediately flew towards the lizards, which were soaked in the poison of poisonous frogs, which caused terrible torment with just one touch. Upon seeing an enemy attack, the lizards are immediately given the command to hide behind their shields from arrows. The arrows hit the metal plates and immediately bounce off them, naturally without causing any damage. From this, the frogs and Shunen opened their mouths and eyes wide. The frogs found it hard to believe that their arrows were easily blocked. Holding one of the plates in his hands, Rockrak thoughtfully says that they are capable of withstanding spears, not to mention arrows, and Yor again admires these wonderful things. But Shunen decides to ignore the shields and continue firing at the enemy, as they cannot allow the lizards to advance. But suddenly a strange smoke appears in the air, and this immediately distracts Shunen. Looking around the area, the frog could not understand where the strange smoke came from. But when he looks back towards the enemy, he realizes that the lizards have disappeared because of the smoke, which means the accuracy of the frog's shots will also drop. While Shunen was in the field wondering where the smoke was coming from, someone continued to set fire to the tree. Owen was the cause of the arson, and his comrades behind him did not understand why the lizard was setting the village on fire. But when the lizard is asked about the club in his hand, he looks at it and replies that they were given them on Shunen's orders. But the lizards only become more indignant because they do not understand how Shunen could order the village to be burned. But looking somewhere far ahead, Owen replies that it was Rockrak who asked him for a favor. The lizards are again surprised by the words of their friend, but now there is more distrust and anger on their faces than shock and fear. But Owen calmly tells them that they must trust him, and the Blackscale tribe will be able to defeat the frogs. But with their clubs in hand, the lizards continue to be outraged at how ordinary lizards can stand up to frogs and how they can trust the deceiver Owen. As he continues to burn the village, Owen calmly replies that this is why they should trust him. It is precisely because he is a cunning man who was not afraid to risk everything he had. Hearing this, the lizards are surprised and later lower their gaze down to the ground. Thanks to Owen's courage, they too decide to risk everything they have left and set their clubs on fire. Shunen stood and looked far ahead, and in his eyes one could see despair mixed with surprise and hopelessness. From afar, he watched his home village burn and couldn't understand how Owen could do such a thing. After this, the frog frowns and says that they need to retreat, explaining that the lizards in the village also betrayed them. Shunen turns sharply to the others and loudly says that the enemy currently has the advantage, which is why they need to retreat. When Shunen hears that their warriors will be killed in this case, he is furious at these idiots who do not understand that if the direct heir falls into danger, then the whole tribe will end. But the frogs cannot resist the order and begin to retreat, laying down their weapons. Suddenly, one of the frogs asks Shunen if they will go to Oh Boy, his warrior, but Shunen remains silent. Afterwards, he turns his head to the side and thinks about the fact that he has no doubt in Oh Boy's fighting skills. But looking at the small island, he believes there is a more effective way to get rid of the lizards. Oh Boy stood on the other bank and watched from afar as their village burned. He frowns and asks if Mr. Shunen is fighting in the lower part of the village and receives confirmation of his words. He begins to calculate his warriors because, as he remembers, there was a detachment of warriors near the place of the feast, and later they sent 5 more to find out what was going on. But most likely, everyone is already dead. Now there are 15 warriors left on the island and 4 or 5 on the island. There are 10 with Oh Boy, and together with the warriors of the upper part of the village, there are only 45, which indicates a numerical advantage on the side of the frogs. One of the frogs pulls an arrow towards a small frog that was hidden in a pouch on his belt. Oh Boy ordered the frogs to coat the arrows with poison, and when Shunen arrived, they would go into battle. Suddenly, Oh Boy notices movement in the forest and, pointing his bow there, orders everyone to get ready to shoot. But when he got into a fighting stance, he was surprised by how nervous he felt now. He experiences the same feeling as when meeting a cockatrice, and his instincts tell him that there is danger ahead. As soon as the frogs see the enemy, they immediately start shooting at him. But almost immediately, they look up and look at their enemy with horror. Drake, with Joel on his back, deftly caught the enemy arrow and calmly chewed it. Joel immediately reports that Manun has only grown stronger in these lands, but the lizard behind him wonders if the Drake's arrows will hit him. But looking at the Drake, who spat out the arrow as if nothing had happened, she says that he tries to eat everything that flies near his mouth. As soon as Manun's mouth is free of debris, his pupils immediately become narrower and he begins to loudly growl at his enemies. Looking at the frogs, who have crouched on the ground and have put away their bows, Jowl informs his pet that there is a whole feast for him here. One of the frogs panics and reports that the arrows are not working, but Oh Boy noticed this without him. Oh Boy gets the idea to shoot in the eyes, but he immediately abandons it when a more effective one comes to mind. The angry Manun immediately rushes at his enemies, opening his mouth wide. Both manage to dodge the beast's jaws, but his partner doesn't have time to react as quickly. Looking back, he sees the Drake grabbing onto the frog's body and most likely biting off its head. Looking into the eyes of the predator, he decides that this monster is no match for the cockatrice. and the drake is much faster, which makes it impossible to aim for the eyes. Then he decides to get the poison not in the eyes but in the mouth, and throws his frog at the drake. Without thinking twice, Manhwa immediately grabs the treat and swallows it. Oh Boy orders to throw his frogs into the mouth of the monster, who is ready to devour everything. In addition, he cannot have protection from the poison, and one after another the frogs begin to throw out their little frogs. Drake deftly grabs each of them without even missing a single one. Zhao looks down and wonders about the enemy's actions, and the lizard behind him directly answers that he and the frogs from the bags are thrown into Manhwa's mouth. While Manhwa licks his lips in pleasure, Zhao doesn't understand why they are giving up their weapons. But when she realizes what the enemy's plan was, a grin appears on her face, signifying superiority over the enemy. When Oh Boy hears that their poisoning plan was a failure from the start, he is overcome with horror and fear. Manhwa the predator looks at the frogs below who are unable to resist him. Without thinking twice, he attacks Oh Boy and biting off his head gets dirty in the blood of his prey. One of the frogs in the village hid in the bushes and aimed at its target. He releases an arrow that flies into the head of Rak, who did not see his opponent. But by turning slightly, he easily breaks the arrow with his tail and does not look like he was caught off guard. Yor kills the archer with a blow to the head and counts another dead. Addressing Rak, he says that most likely he was the last warrior, and Shunin abandoned his tribe and ran away. But looking at the lizards who were the frog, he continues to say that it was because of this that they became bolder and began to attack the frogs. Rak frowns slightly at this and replies that they have no right to judge the lizards for this. Yor turns to look at the leader with interest as he continues to express his thoughts. Rak found it strange that despite all the tribe's problems, Chief Alroy never showed up. Hearing this statement from the leader of his tribe brings a smile to Stephen's face. The guy admits to himself that this happened because of him. There is a fungal disease that can infect amphibians, is highly contagious, fatal, and has a long incubation period. What was important was that it infects the mucous membrane of amphibians and was very difficult to find. But around the time Rak decided to leave their holy land, Stephen managed to find that disease. Hundreds of kilometers from the tribe, he found a frog that had died from the disease. And then Stephen was able to transport her to a distant lake thanks to countless wasps and other insects. Some of the insects flew straight into the frog village. And when the insects found their targets, they dropped their cargo on them, which is why the tribe's leader later suddenly disappeared. As night fell on the earth, the frogs lit torches and beat their drums. Below, little baby lizards sat in tears, their hands tied and frightened. Even an attempt at a sacrifice to heal did not help Alroy. As if his mind had already gone cloudy, Alroy called out to his two-headed god. The frogs asked to accept their offerings and show the lizards all their divine power. The frog continued to ask for all the lizards to be destroyed when a body with two heads and angry glowing eyes appeared in the water. When Shunin arrived on the island, he was surprised that his father had already begun the ritual and was glad that the frogs would win. Suddenly, someone calls out loudly to Rak, which makes the lizard turn his gaze to the side from which the noise came. Owen, who was trying to catch his breath, came running to him in a hurry. Turning to the lizard, Rak says that he did a great job, but does not understand why there is such a rush. Then Owen screams that they urgently need to go to the island in the middle of the lake. Rak asks what is on that island and is told that there are lizard children there who will soon be sacrificed to God. Owen's voice only grew louder as panic set in, and he managed to finish his sentence nervously. He continues to tell Rak, who only looked at his interlocutor with his eyes, that God could not heal the frogs, but he will try to attack them, and Rak's warriors may not have enough strength to defeat the monster. But Rak turns around and calmly says that Owen should have told him about this earlier, because the frogs had already swam away and arrived on the island. Owen then suggests that they swim, but Rak towers over him and looking gloomy says that it is too dangerous because they will be attacked while they are trying to reach the island and will be defenseless. Hearing the refusal, tears begin to flow from the lizard's eyes, but he does not give up trying to persuade the leader. Owen has no choice but to fold his hands in front of him and announce that his son is there and is about to be sacrificed. Hearing such unexpected news, Rak's eyes open slightly and one can see growing anger in them. Giving in to his anger, the chief immediately punches Owen in the face so hard that he immediately flies away. Beginning to lash out at Owen with insults, Rak shows his teeth and says that he should have trusted him earlier. Covering his mouth with his hand, from where blood was coming out, Owen listened to the angry speech of the chieftain about how he did not believe in the god of these frogs, and he was sure that they could defeat him, and even Rak himself would show the strength capable of defeating God. But having calmed down a little, Rak lowers his hand and clenches his fist tighter. Gritting his teeth, Rak wonders why, for the sake of his own child, Owen didn't tell him about this sooner. When Yahello returned to Manhwa, she saw Owen crying in front of their leader. But after that, she immediately raises her head and looks somewhere into the distance. She notices a small island from which loud sounds have begun to come. Suddenly, something big appears out of the water, creating an equally big splash of water. Seeing his god, Alroy raises his hands up and begins to rejoice. Now the two-headed lizard rose from the water and looked down on all the animals. Pointing to the bound lizards, Alroy asks to accept his gift. Raising his hands above his head, the chief asks that the black-scaled lizards be punished for daring to disturb the Lord's lake. Seeing the offering, the snake opens its huge mouth and reveals huge, sharp fangs. Owen, who was sitting on the other side of the hand and saw the frog god, decided that he was now too late. He lowers his head, realizing his helplessness and stupidity, and Rakrak and Jaol look ahead at the islet. Looking at the two-headed giant snake, Rakrak wonders if they should try, since they don't even have an advantage this time. No tricks will help them, and most likely there will be losses in their ranks. But suddenly the flow of his thoughts is interrupted by a familiar light nearby. Rakrak turns around in surprise at the blue butterfly that was flying forward. After this, Rakrak quietly turns to Owen, who fell to his knees and continued to sob. When Rakrak asks him to look, the lizard raises his head and looks forward with his eyes that were filled with bitter tears. While he looked in surprise at the huge creature that appeared in front of them, which very much resembled a praying mantis, Rakrak turns slightly to Owen and asks if the lizard believes in miracles. Looking at their two-headed god, the frogs began to praise the creature that had come. Pointing to the small lizards that were trembling, Alroy asked God to accept their offering. But suddenly the snake stops looking at the animals below and raises its head in front of itself, looking far ahead. Shunen notices the inaction of their god and, surprised by the strange behavior, looks up at the two-headed snake. After this, he decides to turn his head in the same direction as the snake, asking what god is waiting for them. And turning around, he sees a huge creature which was larger than their god watching them. As the praying mantis began to approach closer, one of the snake's heads began to hiss at its enemy. The loud noise attracts the attention of the frogs, and now Alroy turns back, and Shunen's face shows fear and horror. Seeing the huge creature towering above them, the frogs begin to scream and back away. When Stephen finished summoning the creature, it looked like a praying mantis. A fourth-level minor race, a minimum level of divinity and faith, and an essence of abomination allowed the player to create his own creature. The two-headed snake decides to attack first and, opening its mouth wide, aims at the mantis's head. But the mantis grabs the head with its limb and forcibly closes it, surprising the snake with its strength. While he was holding one of the heads, the other began to hiss at him, and the frogs tried to run in different directions and escape. In the confusion, the snake crushes some of the frogs, and Shunen tries to drag his father away and save him. But Alroy's mind began to leave him from the sight that opened before his eyes. The second head of the snake decides to pounce on the praying mantis, while some of the frogs still believe that their god will win. But the mantis strikes with its other free limb and cuts the snake's head in two. Suddenly, the praying mantis turns to the snake and says that the water snake must realize how insignificant he is. At the same time, Alroy and Shunen watched in horror as one of their god's heads was chopped off and his blood spilled around the area. The mantis turns his attention back to the first and last head of the snake and decides to present it to his creator. He wants to help the water snake atone for his guilt and begins to slowly dig his sharp limb into his neck, from where blood immediately appears. When the mantis has managed to grab onto the head strongly enough, it tears it off with force and lifts it up over the snake. The mantis believed that the death of the water serpent would allow him to atone for his sins and his stupidity. Shunen and Alroy sat near the fallen serpent, watching the creature illuminated by the moonlight. The two-headed monster was level 4 and had good strength characteristics, and its habitat was unknown. Shrathis, who was at the 11th level, had characteristics that were much superior to the snake, and his strength exceeded that of the snake by almost 100 points. Seeing the victory over the snake, the lizards from the Blackscale tribe begin to rejoice, and Owen continued to cry next to Jaol, who put her paw on his shoulder. Stephen came to take a closer look at the scale of the battle, and it all seemed incredible to the guy. The snake looked quite strong, but it was far from Shrathis, who was accidentally given a skill of great strength. But despite this, Stephen is sure that the weak enemy did not reveal the snake's potential. For killing the snake, the system rewards Stephen with the essence of an evil spirit. Due to the circumstances, the guy thinks he's very lucky. When Stephen decides to find out the snake's habitat, a smile appears on his face from understanding the situation. It turns out that the snake's true habitat is seawater, but in the lake it was fresh, which is why he could not use all his strength. A river habitat would be very useful, but it will come in handy later, not now, so Stephen puts it off. As the frogs swam away from the island, the blood turned the water red, moving further and further. Alroy kept looking up, constantly wondering how this could have happened. Turning a sad gaze to his father, Shunen notes that he is weak due to the scabies. This happened because of the power of the two-headed monster, with the appearance of which the leader began to rely on this creature in everything, and all the warriors hid behind God, after which Shunen also became a coward, which he admits to himself. Turning to Stephen, the mantis reports that his will has been fulfilled, and the guy praises his creature. And then Stephen adds that the mantis can rest until next time. As he disappears, the mantis says that when the time comes, he will once again submit to the will of his creator. With the snake defeated and the mantis gone to rest, Steven decides that all is well now. But looking at Rockrak, the guy wonders if the leader will stop there. The frogs were heading to the upper village in boats, and since the island was now empty, the lizards could simply swim across it. Turning to his tribe, Rockrak enthusiastically says that today they will win and asks if there is a lizard who could lead them to the frog village. Owen immediately offers his candidacy, explaining that his son is on the island whom he wants to see, and the lizard is not tired anyway. But suddenly someone else volunteers, causing Rockrak to immediately shift his gaze from Owen forward. Turning to Rockrak, the other gray-brown lizards also ask to be allowed to help the black-scale tribe. But Rockrak calmly replies that the lizards cannot fight with such wounds. Moreover, they are not warriors, but they object to him that they were warriors before, and not only warriors are capable of killing frogs. It may be dishonorable, but the lizards came here to indiscriminately kill the frogs that had ignited the flames of hatred in them for a long time, and Rockrak inspired them to fight and move on. Looking at the lizards in surprise, Rockrak says that they are upset. And in tears they answer him that they are in despair because of all those loved ones they have lost and for whom they must avenge. After listening to the desperate lizard, Rockrak calmly gives his consent. Rockrak raises his hand and tells the former slaves that they have a right to be angry, and that anyone who wants revenge can follow him. There was a target lying on the grass near the tree, and one arrow had already hit it. Shunen cheerfully stated that with a little more practice, Rockrak would be on par with their warriors, but the lizard did not understand why, in the opinion of his interlocutor, he was not good enough since he had already hit the target. When Rockrak hands over the bow, Shunen tells him that shooting skill is not the main thing, and the lizard has strength and accuracy, but he spends too much time on a shot. Rockrak asks if it would be better to aim for the enemy's weak points instead of randomly firing, and Shunen laughs slightly at this and replies that in combat the target will move. First, you should slow down or stop the victim and only then finish him off. Rockrak agrees with the statement, and Shunen asks to remember his advice. Suddenly, Shunen declares that if they can establish friendship between the tribes, he will teach Rockrak how to make bows. And Rockrak smirks slightly at this. Pointing to the bow, Shunen says that all the materials are very simple and any lizard can get them. Suddenly, Rockrak remembered that conversation and wondered what that strange feeling was that he felt then. Now his entire tribe was swimming across the lake while Rockrak was thinking about that conversation. When they almost reach the island, Rockrak decides to find out from Shunen personally. When Owen emerges from the water, he immediately rushes forward. When he sees his son, he immediately rushes to him, and hugging each other, they both begin to cry. But Owen wasn't the only parent who was happy to see their living child. Others also hugged their children and cried with them. Taking off his fur cape and skull, Rockrak tells Yura to send the wounded and children by boat, and he himself goes with them. After this, Rockrak says that Yura must move the gray lizards to the lower part of the village in order to cause unrest among the enemies. Yura guesses that the leader wants to attack the enemy from two sides, but Rockrak asks not to rush, and when he has already attracted the attention of the frogs, they will be able to swim across with the warriors and attack. Yura finally asks if everything will go well, and Rockrak reassures him that there are now fewer frogs, and the lizards have a new divine blessing. The chief continues to say that their dark scales are difficult to see in the water under the moonlight, and after that he draws a clear conclusion to everything that has been said. The frogs are finished. While the village was burning, many frogs panicked and tried to run away and escape the fire. Alroy and his defenders were also panicking and could not understand where the lizards came from. Looking up, the tribal leader looked at his enemies with horror. A spear flies into one of the frogs and its impact sprays blood everywhere. While the lizards were attacking the frogs, they tried to call for help, but no one could help them. Rockrak swings his spear, the radius of which is so large that it hits two frogs at once. When he has dealt with one of the frogs, he looks at the rest with a predatory look. Even in this situation, Alroy continues to call upon his god, asking him to save him in exchange for all the sacrifices he has made. But Rockrak immediately lunges towards the leader and thrusts his spear forward. The lizard's spear hits the frog's head straight from where a pile of blood now pours out. As Rockrak pulls out his spear, the chieftain's now soulless body begins to fall backwards. Rockrak indifferently replies that their god is no longer here. Shunen, hiding somewhere, listened in horror as the lizards continued to hunt the remaining frogs. While the others try to find him, the frog clutches his bow in his hands and thinks that there were more of them and that they had poisoned weapons. Shunen's father can no longer lead the warriors, and the lizards are resistant to poison, so arrows are no obstacle to them. Shunen didn't know what to do in this hopeless situation, and because of this, he began to feel more and more panicked. But having decided to look out from his hiding place, he does not notice how they have already crept up on him from behind. Rockrak, who was able to find the frog, turns to his prey, which frightens Shunen to the point of horror. Turning around, Shunen falls to the ground and screams in fear. Seeing the frog fall to the ground, Rockrak asks if Shunen is not a warrior. Demanding to raise his weapon, Rockrak says he will be merciful and let Shunen die a warrior, but the frog begs for mercy. Shunen timidly looks up at the lizard and asks about their friendship, saying that he is not at all angry at the Rockrak tribe. Rockrak pretends to think about this phrase when Owen arrives, and Shunen justifies himself by saying that the two-headed monster threatened them too. Then, pointing to his bow, Shunen offers to reveal the secret to Rockrak. The lizard asks about the secret, and Shunen promises to tell how to make a bow, since Rockrak was interested in the materials. Interested in the frog's offer, Rockrak asks what they made their bows from, and Shunen replies that they made them from sinew. When Rockrak hears that these are tendons from the back, he noticeably darkens, his pupils narrow, and the Aruka that was holding the bow squeezes the object tighter. Looking from the frog to the bowstring, Rockrak asks what kind of creature's tendons they used. But upon hearing this question, Shunen's gaze became filled with hopelessness and horror, and he hesitantly replied that they were the tendons of the lizards. Hanging his head lower, Shunen realizes that he has literally dug his own grave. Tilting his head slightly to the side, Rockrak dryly answers the frog that he understood him. After this, the lizard stretches out his hand and opens the tent. Rockrak calmly says that they hold no grudge against each other and the lizard has won, so he accepts Shunen's deal. Looking at the frog, Rockrak replies that Shunen must run. As the frog leaves the tent, he casts a cautious glance at the lizard, fearing that he will be attacked from behind. But this does not happen, and Shunen immediately begins to run away into the forest. At this, Owen frowns and asks if the chief will allow him to escape. But as he prepares his bow to fire, Rockrak replies that everything is fine. Drawing his bowstring, Rockrak takes aim at the fleeing Shunen. And then he explains that he just needed a moving target, and a frog was perfect for that role. Tied to a tree was the corpse of a frog, whose chest had already been pierced with arrows many times, and whose head also had several arrows in it. In those days, Rockrak practiced intensively with the bow. Owen smiles at the chief and says that he shoots much better now and the arrows fly correctly. But Rockrak replies that even if the bowstring is made of a different material, as soon as you pull it tighter, it immediately breaks, so it would be nice to make it stronger. To this, Owen objects that under current conditions, they will not be able to find better materials, and Rockrak sadly says that it is time to leave this forest. Turning his gaze to his interlocutor, Rockrak says that winter is approaching, and this is the habitat of buffalo, who will move to warmer places in search of food. Remembering something, Rockrak asks if Owen went hunting today. When Rockrak's arrow hits its target again, Owen answers his question in the affirmative. Owen says they've taken care of the frogs that were roaming the area, and there won't be any problems with the supply of material for a while. Drawing another arrow, Rockrak is pleased with what he heard. The arrow he shot then hit Shunen right in the paw. From the strong and unexpected pain, the frog immediately begins to scream and immediately flies down. Unable to stand on his paws, Shunen falls, and it can be seen that the arrow is stuck in his paw. As soon as the Shunen fell, enraged gray-brown lizards immediately rushed at him. The frog could only lie on the ground and watch his enemies in horror. Owen approaches him and stabs him in the chest with a knife. When he takes out the knife, he gets dirty in someone else's blood, and the frog's body falls limply to the ground. Suddenly, Owen asks Rockrak if Alra is his target. But turning to his interlocutor, Rockrak replies negatively that the frog was wounded just as badly as Shunen, and his bones will suffer the same fate as Shunen, whose skull Owen now wore. Owen continues to share interesting things from this hunt, while his son hides behind a tree nearby and Jowl approaches. Jowl immediately notices the boy and, approaching from behind, bends down and looks at him with interest. Suddenly, she starts talking to him, which really scares Ian, and he screams. The cub falls to the ground in fright, and Jowl asks what he's doing here and if he has anything to say to Rockrak. But immediately after her question, she notices the object that Ian dropped. She reaches for the object, and now the boy looks more excited. When she lifts the figurine, she sees that their god has been carved out of the wood. When Jowl showed the figure to Rockrak, he immediately recognized their keeper. The chief continues to look with interest at the thing in Jowl's hands and praises its quality. The boy stood and listened to the leader's words about how the figurine was beautiful and made very well. Hearing this, a smile blossoms on the boy's face and a light blush appears on his cheeks. Afterwards, Ian announces his intention to give the figurine to the chieftain, but Rockrak hesitates before accepting the gift. Then Owen turns to him and says that everything is fine, because among the children from the village, exchanging objects is a common practice. Jowl turns to the boy and asks if there are many other children like him in the village, and the boy enthusiastically answers yes. After this, he turns back to Rockrak and begins to talk about the keeper. According to the boy, the keeper saved them because he is a great and kind creature. Hearing such words about their guardian, Jowl and Rockrak exchange glances. Turning to Owen, Rockrak regrets that he only has one of these, but his interlocutor suggests looking for more in the village. Rockrak agrees and adds that he is ready to pay any price or exchange it for something. But wanting to return to their conversation, Rockrak asks again what Owen was talking about then. Owen recalls his story and reports that in the cave where the frogs were hiding, he discovered something strange. Hearing this, Rockrak and Yahello look at their interlocutor in surprise. Sometime later, Owen took them to the place, informing them that the frogs used that entrance as a shelter. When a cave appeared in front of them, Rockrak asked if this was the one Owen was talking about, and the lizard answered in the affirmative. When they entered, Rockrak immediately noticed a blue butterfly, and Owen continued to tell that when they entered, everyone was already killed. When the lizards finally arrived at the place, Rockrak and Yahello looked ahead in surprise, and Owen turned to them and asked if it all looked very suspicious. They stood in front of what looked like a door in the wall with something carved into it. The lizards were fascinated by how something so detailed could be engraved on such a hard stone. Looking down, Yahello says it reminds her of something, and Rockrak agrees, saying it looks like the one the centipede had on its back. The discovery greatly interested Stephen, who had been watching everything, and he assumed that this was an entrance to ancient ruins. There are many ancient ruins that allow you to gain knowledge, discover wonders, and obtain items with specific functions or demonic items. But with such a low level of civilization development, even if the Rockrak tribe masters the ancient knowledge, it will not matter much. Ruins can create or alter special resources, and they are also fixed in place and of less value to Rockrak because he is a nomad. The chances of finding a unique relic were slim, and Stephen hoped that these were not the ruins of an ancient castle. Finally, the lizards who were trying to open the door managed to do so. After this, a bright bluish light appeared, which seemed to circle around one point. The door opened, and the light that came inside illuminated the ancient ruins and many staircases. Rockrak and a small detachment decided to follow inside and went down the stairs. Looking down, Yahello reports that it's deep, and they'll have to climb all the stairs, and Rockrak wonders how nice it would be if they could just jump down. Yahello then asks if he will pray to God. But Rockrak replies that he does not want to bother their god with trifles. Suddenly, somewhere to the side, Rockrak begins to hear a strange sound, which attracts the lizard's attention. To the side in the shadows, there was someone whose eyes glowed in the dark. When strange furry animals emerged from the shadows, the lizards assumed they were rats. Rockrak wonders why the rats are hissing so loudly, and Yahello explains that it is a nutria. After this, Rockrak recognizes the animals but is still surprised by their size. And now the nutria seemed enraged, and for some reason were moving in a large group. Owen says that this is the first time he's seen anything like this, which leads Rockrak to assume that they are monster rats. An unexpected thought makes Rockrak frown, and he asks everyone to be careful, because these rats may be guarding this place. Immediately after this, one of the rats attacks the lizards. Others followed her, but the lizards thrust their spears forward, which allowed them to defend themselves. Without much difficulty, the lizards continued to injure the rats. Observing this, Rockrak ordered the destruction of the rats, which were suspiciously aggressive. Suddenly, someone asks if they can eat the rats and offers to gut them and take them with them. Suddenly, Yahello asks if they can raise these animals on a farm like buffalo. Owen then suggests that if Rockrak wants to do something new on the farm, he should look at the fish. But the chief asks an innocent question about whether fish just appear and disappear on their own. Owen replies that the fish reproduce and lay eggs in the water, and the frogs knew about this, so they forbade fishing during the breeding season. Owen's speech about how all that would be needed is to build a dam and keep the fish locked up is interrupted by the cry of one of the lizards behind him. Grasping his sore arm, the lizard suddenly announces that the rat in front of him is still alive. Rockrak immediately approaches the lizard and asks if he was bitten, but the lizard, with a trembling hand, denies it. After this, he reports that when he wanted to skin the rat, he felt a sharp and burning pain in his hand. Looking at the dead rat nearby, from which a small glow emanated, Rockrak ponders the lizard's words. Suddenly, he decides to touch the rat too, and reaching out his hand towards it, lightly touches the fur with his fingers. At that very moment, he feels the same thing that he was told about, and when a sharp light appears, Rockrak squints. He immediately grabs his burned hand, and Yahello next to him is worried about his condition, but Rockrak reassures her, saying that he is fine. The rat was killed by a spear in the neck, from where fresh blood was oozing, and small lightning bolts were running through the rat's body. Stephen checked the beast's characteristics and discovered that nutrias are possessed by the devil, and their ability allows them to electrocute an enemy with one touch. And the guy knows that electric demons are strong, but if Rockrak breaks through all the ancient ruins, he will most likely gain demonic power. Stephen reflects that gaining magical power will not immediately make Rockrak a mage, but with each generation their power will grow. The problem, however, is that in the lost world, divinity and magic are in conflict. According to the rules, magic comes from ancient evil, not from God, and magicians do not rely on the gods. And if there are many such people, then punishment will follow. But it's not that it cannot be prevented, it's just that there are too many possible developments. All the lizards were looking around the area, and Rockrak was still sitting next to the dead nutria, and suddenly saw some kind of glow nearby. A creature appeared in the air in front of him, resembling a stingray, and from which lightning emanated. Suddenly, the creature turns to Rockrak and asks if the lizard wants to possess the power that the creature could give him. Yahello distracts Rockrak and offers to come back here later if Rockrak is feeling unwell, and the lizard agrees. Turning to the others, Rockrak asks them to make sure all the rats are dead and that everyone should check their bows, spears, and other equipment. Looking up at the strange creature again, Rockrak wonders about its origins and whether only Rockrak can see this creature. The creature then answers Rockrak that he is a spirit who protects this place and is visible only to those who have great power. Then Rockrak asks the spirit what power he is talking about, and he himself notices that his deepest feelings are not transmitted to the spirit. Stephen also notices an evil spirit in front of Rockrak, but is unsure whether to warn the lizard about it. In order to make a decision, Stephen decides to check the characteristics of Rockrak, and in them the guy discovers that the lizard has acquired cunning, but it is unknown when he acquired this ability. He most likely developed them while fighting Shu Nen, which is very surprising and interesting. The power that the evil spirit spoke of is electricity, which allows it to burn living beings but also to emit light, like the sun, and the evil spirit was ready to give this power to Rockrak. After listening to his interlocutor, Rockrak answers him that he would be very happy if the spirit gave him such power. But when the spirit said that there were certain conditions, Rockrak demonstratively turns away and asks again, "Didn't the spirit say that he would give her away for free and didn't mention anything about conditions?" To this, the spirit calmly replies that these conditions are a trifle, and Rockrak's strength will be sufficient to fulfill them. Rockrak was still sitting with his back to the spirit and told him that if he wanted to make a deal, he should have said so right away. But in that case, Rockrak would be very disappointed with the conversation. But when Rockrak begins to suspect the spirit of evil intentions, he turns his gaze to him. And then he adds that if the spirit wants something from him, then he must show the appropriate respect. Pomrachnev Rockrak demands to know about his intentions, and if the spirit tries to hide something, then there will be no further conversation. For some time, the spirit continued to tower over the lizard and did not respond to the lizard's words. At this point, Yahello arrives to say that everyone is ready to leave, but after thinking for a moment, Rockrak replies that he will catch up with them later. When Rockrak's tribe left the cave, the spirit revealed that he was trapped in these ruins and wanted Rockrak to come down and defeat the guardian who protects the seal. After this, the spirit will gain freedom and grant Rockrak his ability. Slightly opening his palms, Rockrak asks again if the spirit means the sparkling power of those monstrous rats, but this is not the most accurate name in the spirit's opinion. After this, the spirit reminds that his ability is called electricity, which at the moment can only create small sparks. But according to the spirit, the more Rockrak uses the ability, the stronger it will grow, and after some time, the lizard will be able to summon even a thunderstorm. This power will improve and develop, and one day it will become comparable to divine power, but Rockrak does not seem interested or surprised to hear this. After this, the spirit goes on to explain that not only Rockrak, but also other members of the tribe will be able to use this ability, and if Rockrak wants to monopolize it, then a ritual can be performed. What he heard astonished Rockrak, although he did not show it, but asked why such a powerful being was locked up here. To this, the spirit replied that his ability was too powerful, and he was trapped because he could not be overcome. This is always the case with dangerous things. But Rockrak didn't look interested and only asked what the hell, which surprised the evil spirit very much. Folding his arms across his chest, Rockrak adds that the spirit had just explained how dangerous he was, and at that moment, the spirit realized his mistake. Rockrak is sure that the spirit is hiding something from him, and after using his ability, there may be more side effects than benefits. Rockrak asks not to lie to him, because he can simply destroy the entrance to the cave so that no one can find the ruins, and from these words, the spirit becomes alarmed. As Rockrak turned away and began to walk away, the spirit began to follow him in a panic, agreeing to explain everything. The evil spirit understands that he has been driven into a dead end and has no choice but to hesitantly begin his story. Once upon a time, this spirit was one of the beings that ruled this world, and it came from a long-forgotten demon. Neither the gods nor this spirit remembered the origin of those demons, and the spirit was trapped here for an unknown amount of time. Abilities of unknown origin intoxicate people because they do not understand the reason for the appearance of powers, and falsely believe that the abilities belong to them. From these words, Rockrak recalls those who were intoxicated by power, and assumed that it was a demonic force that influenced people in this way. The spirit agrees with the lizard's thought and adds that his ability is chaotic. When the spirit says that the ability's owners are chosen randomly, Rockrak begins to understand one important thing. God's power is given to those who have been chosen by his judgment. But at the same time, even those who do not know how to handle power can still master it. Coming to the conclusion that the power will develop over time, Rockrak looks closely at the spirit. According to Rockrak, there will certainly be those who desecrate God and rebel against him. But the spirit's ability is powerful and desirable. Moreover, it will be useful in battle. When Rockrak states that he has conditions, the spirit immediately turns to him, ready to listen. First, Rakrak asks about the ability being randomly transferred, but the spirit said that it can be monopolized. Rakrak asks if the ability can be granted only to a select few, and the spirit suggests that it can, but does not understand why the lizard would make such a decision. To this, Rakrak calmly replies that if the gift is given only to the chosen ones, then everyone will perceive it as a gift from God, and in that case, no one will contradict God. The spirit wants to object to something, but Rakrak does not want to listen to him and begins to talk about his second condition. The second condition is that the evil spirit must also believe in the god Rakrak. The spirit becomes outraged by this and says that he is a demonic spirit. But even though the evil spirit is older than all the gods, for Rakrak it is not this that matters, but what the spirit will do in the future. The spirit continues to exclaim that none of the gods like demonic spirits, but Rakrak replies that he should not judge their god by his prejudices. According to Rakrak, their nameless bug god is generous and the spirit seems helpful, and Stephen has no answer to that. There is silence in the air, and later the spirit awkwardly asks if god Rakrak will accept him. To this, Rakrak firmly replies that he will accept if the spirit agrees to the conditions. And at this moment, the spirit wants to admit that in fact he is not locked in these ruins, but rules them. Those nutria were just an attempt to break Rakrak, as the spirit claimed. The spirit continues that it was a test to see if Rakrak was suitable, but the spirit was still able to trick the lizard, and therefore wonders if Rakrak is angry with him. But the lizard only nods understandingly and replies that he forgives the spirit, and his interlocutor is very surprised by such an act. Rakrak explains that since the spirit lives in such a damp and dark place with the rats, he should be more tolerant of the spirit. The lizard continues to tell the wondering spirit that he should go outside and see many beautiful places. The spirit suddenly asks what the lizard's name is, and Rakrak answers his new friend with a slight smile on his face. After this, a lot of lightning appears and the spirit says that if the god Rakrak accepts him, then the abilities will go to the lizards. Stephen receives a notification that the spirit wants to become his subordinate, and after thinking about the fact that Stephen can overcome the ability and gain a demonic ability, the guy reaches out his finger to agree. After this, Stephen praises his priest and considers their meeting to be a success for both Stephen and Rakrak. Someone said that in this way the nameless god of beetles gave Rakrak the ability, and he mastered the power of thunder and lightning. And according to the Wanderer, 9 years have already passed since the chosen Rakrak began his journey. But the man nearby did not understand what relation the nameless god of beetles had to thunderstorms. Then the hooded Wanderer turns to his interlocutor and asks what color the lightning is, and the man replies that it is blue. Then the Wanderer asks what god's name is, and the man replies that he is the blue god of insects because he always sends blue beetles. Suddenly, the man realizes that throughout this long story, they have never introduced themselves to each other and says that his name is Hui. When a man asks the name of his interlocutor, the Wanderer thinks for a moment. Suddenly, he stands up and says that they will have to end their conversation, and the man is very surprised by this. But the Wanderer explains this by saying that uninvited guests have come to visit them. A small detachment of hyena people, Gnolls, who are a warlike savage race with a tribal way of life, walked through the desert. After this, the Wanderer says that he has one question for the traveler Hui. Holding a bow in his hand, he asks if those hyenas look like the people from Salkite. The man is in no hurry to answer the question and begins to look closely at the group passing by. To the man, they were just Gnolls because they were defenseless, lacking weapons and vigilance. After thinking about the words for a moment, the Wanderer replies that this is good reasoning. The Wanderer replies that he thinks so too, and when his hood falls back, it becomes clear that this Wanderer is Owen, who has already pointed his bow and arrow at the hyenas. A group of 7 Gnolls moved casually across the open terrain, not caring about their own safety. Suddenly, a sound is heard from somewhere above, and the very first hyena in the whole group raises his head towards the sound. Suddenly, an arrow, slightly enveloped in lightning, flies into the ground next to them. The hyena immediately realizes that this is an enemy attack and informs the other hyenas. Right there, in the place where the arrow was, a large bolt of lightning appears. Because the hyenas were nearby, they were immediately struck by lightning and electricity began to flow through their bodies. The hyena looks up and immediately recognizes the lizard that attacked them. The hyena immediately curses the lizard towering over them and orders everyone to retreat. While the hyenas were leaving, the lizard turned to his interlocutor and introduced himself to him. The man is immediately surprised that this lizard is Owen, because he could not imagine that he would speak with someone so great. Suddenly, Owen says that he hasn't used his power for a long time, so they can take a break and talk. When Hui notices the smoking pipe in Owen's hand, he immediately recognizes the ritual attributes that were used by the chosen black lizards to replenish their strength. Suddenly, Owen turns to the man and says that everything is fine and he can ask questions if he has any. Suddenly, the man asks that if Owen has such power, then why should he follow someone? Hui didn't mean it as betrayal, but why Owen lived such a hard life, wandering alone in the wilderness. Hui really didn't understand it. Blowing smoke into the air, Owen says there's a reason for that. The man's face shows great surprise when Owen reveals that he is full of sins. With his usual smile on his face, the lizard admits that he once betrayed many of his people. But waving his pipe, he confesses that he has been shown the path to redemption. The path of redemption Owen has chosen is to spread the names of the blue insect god and the tribal chieftain Rakraka through stories and writings. While Owen was wiping the dust off the sign, the man thought about the fact that everyone already knew about the names of this god and that lizard. While Owen was saying that if anyone attacked him, he would simply scare them off, the man was thinking that there was no need to mention the reputation of Rakrak, the great priest and leader. Turning back to his interlocutor, Owen asks with a smile on his face if the man is a traveler. Lightly placing his hand on his chin, the man says that this is indeed the case. Hwai reports that he came from automation. After listening to his interlocutor, Owen asks again about that place. And the man continues to say that he is trying to convey the words of the Lord of Automation, so he heads to the Black-Scale tribe. Suddenly, Owen stands up and says that he didn't think about Hwai being a guest, but in his opinion, that's a good thing. Owen begins to look into the distance and then whistles, apparently calling someone. Immediately after this, someone's silhouette appears in the distance, which is impossible to see due to the dust and sand in the air. But when the animal comes closer, it is clear that it is a bird of very large size. Seeing a huge bird, the surprised man assumes that it is a basilisk. But grabbing the bird by the reins, Owen answers the man in the negative. And it seems he says with a smile that Kavi was only half right because it is a quokka, a cross between a basilisk and a chicken. As Owen climbs onto his bird, he calls Hwai along with him. Waiting for a reaction from Hwai, Owen continues that he was also heading to Rakrak because he hadn't seen him for a long time, so he could let Hwai down. As the man climbs onto the bird, Owen continues to say that in exchange he will have to listen to the rest of his story, but Hwai replies that he is only too happy about it. As the two travelers set off, Hui asked if Owen would tell of the blue god of beetles or the saga of Rakrak, but the lizard replied that it would be a little bit of both. When night fell on the earth, the lizards of the Black-Scale tribe continued their march across the desert. At the head of them all rode Rakrak, riding on a huge bird whose clothes had changed over such a long time. Suddenly, one of the lizards rides up to him about to tell him something, and Rakrak immediately turns to him. The lizard reports that according to the old stargazer, his life is already on the brink. And after this, Rakrak looks worried. The lizard continues to say that according to the old man, if not now, then he will not have time to talk to the leader. But Rakrak does not listen to him and immediately turns around. Rakrak immediately firmly orders them to leave the procession and prepare for the fact that they will remain here tonight. Ur immediately gives a loud command to everyone to stop. As Rakrak ran to the end of the procession, shouts could be heard everywhere that on the leader's orders they were leaving the procession. When Yahello meets Rakrak, she immediately asks if there are any problems. Leaning forward to dismount from the animal, Rakrak asks to tell the astrologer that Rakrak will soon visit him, and that the old man must live until that moment. Realizing why Rakrak is saying this, she sighs and Rakrak asks her to take care of the funeral. And when Rakrak walks away, his head down, Yahello replies that he will definitely take care of them. This night was supposed to be sad, and several lizards had gathered near the tent. An elderly wanderer lay inside the tent. When Rakrak enters the tent, he immediately asks the lizard present about the state of the astrologer. Bowing his head before the leader, the lizard reports that he has done everything in his power, but the wanderer does not have much time left. After a few moments, the old man quietly says that he is very tired. According to him, a lot happened both here and there. He visited many places, learned a lot, lost his arm and was exiled, but later met a leader and was able to teach many to contemplate the sky. The old man continues to sadly talk about how if you are a lizard, then one day an insurmountable fatigue and exhaustion will come. While the old man was talking about how there was only one way to cure this ailment, Rakrak gestured to the other lizard to come out of the tent. Rakrak was very sad to watch and hear his good friend, and he simply continued to silently listen to the old man. Continuing the phrase that the only way to be cured, the old man says that this way is to sleep forever. With a smile on his face, the old man says that he decided to be a little extravagant before his last journey and take up the time of the busiest person in the tribe. In the old man's opinion, time is the price of everything, but Rakrak laughed good-naturedly at the fact that the astrologer had the strength for jokes. But suddenly the wanderer says that he has a question that only Rakrak can answer. Hearing this, the leader immediately turns his interested gaze to the old man. The wanderer asks Rakrak what will happen to them after death. This was a question for the first chosen one, the priest closest to God. The old man was very interested to know what awaited them before death. And hearing such a question, Rakrak thought deeply about it. But the old man asks again if Rakrak believes that when they die, they will fall into eternal sleep, where they will possibly have eternal nightmares. But Rakrak honestly answers that he does not know, and does not understand why the old man decided that Rakrak would be able to answer this question. But the wanderer replies that this is indeed so, because the blue god of insects saved them when they were lost. Therefore, the old man hopes that even after death, God will continue to guide them. This is his faith. The old man asks if Rockrak believes that death is different from God's will, and the chief tells the astrologer that he is right. The blue insect god always guided them when they were lost, so he will continue to do so even after their death. A slight smile appears on the old man's face as he asks if Rockrak really thinks so. Whether he thinks it will be an awkward greeting to come face to face with God, Rockrak thinks it won't be that bad. Raising his head high, the leader imagines that there could be a huge field where they could run for fun, and the tail would touch the soft meadow grass, and a light crunch would be heard under their feet. There will also be a large boulder in that place where you can lie down and rest. It would be too boring if the weather was always good, so sometimes it would change to rainy or cloudy, and there would be a beautiful river next to the meadow. Suddenly, the wanderer sadly says that he would like to have a house where he could rest. Not a tent that would give the impression that he would soon be leaving, but a solid house where he could stay. Rockrak looked sadly at his friend as he talked about how he didn't like tents. The old man honestly admits that he doesn't like tents, and Rockrak begins to understand that the old man is tired of constantly moving from place to place. But if Rockrak's heart finds a place to rest, then as long as he can breathe, everything is fine. Suddenly, the stargazer asks if there are stars in the sky. But Rockrak says that there will be no loneliness there, because God certainly created the stars so that they could navigate and return to their homes. And at that very moment, Rockrak notices a blue glow in the sky. A blue butterfly flew up to them, and Rockrak extended his hand to it and asked if the wanderer could see it. But after a short silence, the wanderer says that his eyes are getting dark. The butterfly was sitting on Rockrak's hand when he realized the astrologer's condition. Frowning slightly, he says that he has a gift for the astrologer. Smiling, the wanderer asks if Rockrak wants to fool around again. In response, Rockrak asks if the old man is going to refuse the gift again. Now he promises to find him quickly when the spirit leaves the old man's body. When the butterfly flew away, Rockrak leaned towards the stargazer in panic. The butterfly returned to its owner and landed on Stephen's hand. The guy thought about what would happen if he died in a lost world. Stephen receives a notification that all the conditions for creating an afterlife have been met, after which he decides to create it. The conditions for the afterlife were the necessary level, faith, resources, and a peaceful death, although the conditions for this peaceful death were not clear. The afterlife is an important element in the lost world, and even thinking through your afterlife views can increase your chances of winning. There are two divisions, and the first is heaven, where good people go. The second is a world where people are doomed to endless suffering. This division exists in order to maintain morality and ethics. The second world, like Valhalla, can be used as a training ground for warriors. And subsequently, those souls that were trained in the afterlife can be sent back to Earth. This will come in handy later in the game, but right now, Stephen sees no point in rushing, because everything is just beginning. Stephen is proud that he can control the afterlife the way he wants. Thick green grass grew on the ancient meadow, and clouds walked across the blue sky. The wanderer lay on his back with his eyes closed. Now the wanderer's body was healed, as if he had never lost his limb. Suddenly, he wakes up because the grass tickled his nose. When he opens his eyes, he stretches his healed hand towards the sky. The astrologer continued to examine his hand with surprise and joy in his eyes. After this, he immediately rises from the grass and directs his gaze to the sky. Then, looking back at the landscape in front of him, he wonders if this is a dream. But after thinking it over, he decides that this is the very place. The meadow that Rockrak spoke of, and the chieftain was right in his description. The old man's body was burned in a fire, and Rockrak stood closest to it. The other lizards lowered their heads, but Rockrak continued to stare into the fire. The old man sat on the grass and decided that he didn't need a house or anything like that. From the peace that came into his soul, a slight smile appears on the wanderer's face. He thinks that this is a really good gift. The old man's soul became lighter, and he began to whistle some melody that was carried away by the wind. But suddenly he notices something interesting behind him and turns his gaze there. Turning in that direction, he notices other lizards that were lying on the grass. But the old man found it strange that those lizards still hadn't woken up. Approaching one of the lizards, the old man thinks that it would be impolite to wake up the deceased lizards. But suddenly his gaze was attracted by another lizard, which was located a little further away. He recognizes one of the lizard warriors who once learned arithmetic from him. This happened when the Goblin Alliance broke through their tribe's defenses and set up an ambush. The places that were inhabited by children and old people were in danger, and it was not clear whether they would be able to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The old man noticed how helpless the lizards were now and asked if this was their end. The goblins, whose tribes had united, continued to advance confidently. But suddenly one of the lizards steps forward, grabbing his spear. And then the lizard quotes a phrase about how one valuable life can save many others. Turning to the old man and with a smile on his face, the lizard said that he was glad to learn arithmetic and thanked the astrologer. That day, several warriors from the Blackscale tribe disobeyed Rockrak's orders because they felt it necessary. It was a heroic sacrifice that no one wanted. At that funeral, Rakrak was very angry that the death of the lizards occurred because they learned to count. Kneeling, Rakrak told the old man that those who were good at counting had disobeyed orders because they believed that saving 2 lives at the cost of 1 was a good choice. Turning his gaze to the chieftain, the old man asks if Rakrak thinks those warriors were wrong. But in tears, Rakrak replies that he is angry precisely because the dead were right, and being angry is the only thing he can do. Now one of the bravely fallen warriors was sleeping peacefully in the meadow. The old man recalls that it was thanks to this lizard that those who were previously uninterested in arithmetic began to take an interest in it. Covering his face with his hand, the old man admits that he is glad to meet this lizard again. Looking around the meadow, the old man wonders if there is really only grass here and nothing divine at all. But suddenly he notices someone's tail behind the tree. The old man is immediately surprised by this and begins to rise to his feet. When the tail began to disappear, the wanderer immediately began to try to call that lizard. A few moments later, he had already gotten up and was running after that unknown lizard. The old man pursued the lizard but did not understand where it was running. And after a few moments, the old man begins to think that there might be a deity here after all. The lizard led the old man to some stone building. If there is a god here, the wanderer would like to ask why they were chosen. Because lizards are superior to other races, or simply the deity is favorable to them. With this thought, the lizard enters the building. Or the real reason is that the lizards turned out to be useful. Rakrak said that it could have been a coincidence, and it could have been an inevitable choice, or it could have been the result of the lizards doing their best. But in any case, this means that the lizards have worked hard. When the old man enters the large room of this building, he looks ahead in surprise. At the top of the stone structure stood a large telescope. As he approaches the object, the wanderer is convinced that Rakrak was right. There are stars and stone houses here. As the wanderer approaches the unknown object, he begins to evaluate the material from which the telescope was made. Later, the lizard begins to look into the eyepiece. And what he sees amazes him because he didn't think that the stars looked like this. He found it hard to believe, and he kept looking away and back through the eyepiece. When the surprise passes, the lizard begins to admire what has opened up before him. Observing the hot gas ball, the stargazer believes that he needs to recalculate the movement of the stars. Now that the wanderer has seen the stars through the telescope, he realizes how superficial his knowledge was. While the lizard was thinking about how wonderful it would be if he could share this knowledge with the living, Stephen was watching from behind him.